It was a typical afternoon in Seattle, with the sky heavy with clouds and a light drizzle falling from time to time. Lily was in her room, lying on her bed with her phone in hand, scrolling distractedly through the screen while listening to the muffled sound of laughter coming from the living room. Her brother, Ryan, had once again brought his friends over, something common on weekends. She was used to the noise, but that day, something different caught her attention. Among the voices blending with the sound of the TV, there was one particular laugh that made her heart race for reasons she couldn't explain. Curious, Lily left her room, trying not to draw attention. She quietly descended the stairs, stopping halfway, where she had a clear view of the living room. That was when she saw him for the first time. Sitting on the couch among Ryan's friends was Jake Cooper, tall, with messy brown hair that looked intentionally tousled, and a smile that seemed to light up the room, even with the gloomy weather outside. He was completely different from Ryan's other friends, who always seemed too loud and a bit immature for her taste. Jake was new in town, having just moved to Seattle after being transferred to the local university. Ryan had casually mentioned that he would be joining their group, but Lily hadn't paid much attention. Now, though, she couldn't look away. He seemed much older and more self-assured than the other guys. Something about him intrigued her, an aura of calm and confidence that wasn't often seen in boys his age. Ryan, noticing his sister's presence at the top of the stairs, smiled and motioned for her to come down. Reluctantly, but not wanting to seem strange, Lily complied. She walked down the stairs and approached the living room, her eyes still fixed on Jake, who hadn't noticed her yet. When Ryan quickly introduced her to the group, Jake finally looked up. In that moment, something shifted. His gaze met hers, and it was as if the world around her stopped for a brief instant. "This is my little sister, Lily," Ryan said casually. "She's still in high school, so don't be surprised if she seems a little out of place." Lily felt her cheeks heat up at Ryan's comment. He always treated her like the baby sister, and although she knew it was a joke, this time it felt more embarrassing than usual. Especially because Jake was looking at her in a way that made her feel strangely exposed, as if he could see past the shy girl facade she tried to maintain. "Nice to meet you, Lily," Jake said with a friendly smile that made her stomach twist into knots. His voice was calm, yet firm, and there was a softness in his tone that disarmed her. She smiled back, unable to find the right words to reply, simply nodding shyly before hurrying to the kitchen, where she pretended to be busy making something to drink. Her heart was racing. She had never felt anything like this before. Jake seemed completely unattainable, almost unreal, as if he belonged to a different world from hers. She knew he was older, her brother's friend, and probably didn't see her in any way other than as a girl he had just met. Even so, something inside her told her that this encounter would not be easily forgotten. In the days that followed, Lily tried to push Jake out of her mind. He would show up occasionally at the house, always with Ryan, but their interactions were brief and formal. She found herself watching him from a distance, trying to figure out what exactly drew her to him. It wasn't just his appearance, though it was obvious he was incredibly handsome. There was something more. Maybe it was the way he always seemed calm and centered, even when the rest of the group was rowdy. One afternoon, while Lily was studying at the kitchen table, she heard the front door open and familiar footsteps echo through the house. Ryan was bringing Jake again, but this time it was different. There were no other friends with them, just the two of them. Lily's heart sped up as she pretended to stay focused on her book, hoping no one would notice her presence. Ryan entered the kitchen first, greeting her with a casual nod before opening the fridge to look for something to eat. Jake appeared right behind him, and to Lily's surprise, he noticed her immediately. "Hey Lily," he said with the same warm smile as before. "What are you studying?" She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden attention. "Oh, biology," she replied, trying to sound casual. Jake approached, looking at the study book with genuine interest. "I hated biology in high school. Anything that involved memorizing scientific names drove me crazy." Lily laughed, surprised by how he could turn a simple comment into something so relaxed and natural. "I'm not a big fan either," she admitted, "but it's part of it, right?" Before the conversation could continue, Ryan interrupted, asking Jake to help him with something in the garage. Jake waved to Lily before leaving, and as she watched him disappear through the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed that day. Maybe it was her imagination, but it seemed like he was starting to notice her more than before. Jake's visits to the Thompson house continued, and over time, he and Lily began to cross paths more often. Each interaction, no matter how brief, left Lily anxious and full of anticipation. She knew she shouldn't get her hopes up. Jake was older, her brother's friend, and as far as she knew, he didn't see her as anything more than Ryan's little sister. However, there were moments when the looks he gave her made her question everything. One evening, while Ryan was upstairs and Lily was alone in the living room, Jake entered unexpectedly. He seemed different, more serious. He sat next to her on the couch, the space between them almost imperceptible, yet still there. Lily felt the air grow denser, and her heart began to beat faster. "You seem deep in thought," Jake commented, breaking the silence with his soft voice. Lily looked at him, trying to control the wave of emotion swirling inside her. "I guess I'm just tired," she replied, not knowing how to express what she was really feeling. Jake nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sometimes things feel harder than they really are, you know? But they pass." Lily smiled faintly, but she felt there was more to his words than a simple observation. There was a hidden meaning, something he wasn't saying out loud. The silence between them returned, but this time it was heavier, full of unresolved tension. Lily knew she was on the brink of something, but she didn't know what. Jake started to show up more frequently at the Thompsons' house. Ryan always brought him over to play video games or watch football on weekends, but more and more, Lily noticed that Jake seemed comfortable in that environment. It wasn't just with Ryan that he got along well. Jake, somehow, managed to easily fit into the family dynamic, chatting with Lily's parents and showing genuine interest in their stories and routines. This made him even more interesting in Lily's eyes. She tried not to pay much attention, but it was impossible to ignore how the atmosphere shifted when Jake was around. Conversations with him flowed easily, as if there was an invisible connection, something she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't like the conversations she had with Ryan's other friends, which were always forced or superficial. With Jake, there was a sense of comfort, yet also a nervousness that made her heart race. Every word he said seemed to carry more weight, even if it was something silly or casual. And it made her think, night after night, about what was happening between them. The first time they really talked alone was one late afternoon when Ryan left to buy pizza. Jake stayed behind, waiting for his friend to return. Lily was sitting at the kitchen counter, pretending to read a book, but in reality, her mind was entirely focused on his presence. The silence in the room was broken when Jake grabbed a soda from the fridge and, instead of sitting on the couch like he usually did, chose the chair next to her. "So, what are you reading?" His voice, though soft, pulled her abruptly from her daydreams. Lily looked at the book in her hands as if seeing it for the first time and forced a smile, trying to hide the nervousness rising in her spine. "Oh, just a romance." She tried to keep her voice calm, but couldn't avoid feeling her cheeks flush. For some reason, it felt embarrassing to admit she was reading a love story in front of him. Jake raised an eyebrow, interested. "What's it about?" He tilted his head, showing genuine curiosity. She thought about lying, saying it was something more academic or deep, but in the end, she gave up on the idea. Jake had a way of making people be honest, as if there was no reason to hide anything. It's about two people who meet by chance and fall in love, but have to overcome a series of obstacles to be together. Jake smiled, taking a sip of his soda. "Sounds interesting. Do they end up together in the end?" Lily shrugged. "I haven't gotten to the end yet, but I think so." For a moment, he seemed thoughtful, as if reflecting on something much larger than the story she had described. "I guess sometimes the obstacles are what make things more interesting. If it were easy, it wouldn't be as fun, right?" She looked at him, surprised by the depth of his words. Jake had this ability to turn a casual conversation into something more meaningful. Lily bit her lip, trying to contain her smile. "You're right. The hard part is them realizing that before they give up." They both laughed, but there was something more behind that exchange of glances. Something that Lily couldn't define, but felt growing stronger every time she was near him. They continued talking, and slowly, Jake began to open up more about himself. He talked about the pressure he felt at university, about how his parents were always expecting him to follow the right path without making mistakes. He mentioned that often, He felt like he was just fulfilling expectations, without really knowing what he wanted for himself. Lily listened carefully, feeling a growing connection. Even though they had a 6-year age difference, suddenly that gap seemed much smaller. Jake, with all his worries and dilemmas, felt much closer to her than she had imagined. He wasn't just a mature friend of her brother. He had his own insecurities, his own fears, and sharing them with her made her feel special, as if she held a unique place in his life. As the weeks passed, these casual conversations became more frequent. Ryan, completely oblivious to the dynamic between his sister and his best friend, kept inviting Jake over, and Lily, little by little, started finding herself more present during these visits. It was as if she were waiting for those moments, knowing that at any minute Jake could show up, and somehow, they'd end up sitting in some corner of the house, talking about life while Ryan was busy with something else. Lily never forced the situation, but it seemed that the conversations flowed naturally, and Jake also seemed to enjoy this closeness. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was a change in Jake's behavior toward her. He still treated her with kindness and warmth, but Lily started noticing small details. How he held eye contact a second longer than necessary, how his smile seemed different when she was around, and how, every now and then, he seemed to hesitate, as if carefully choosing his words before speaking. She didn't know if she was imagining things, but these moments made her heart race. One time, while walking down the street after an outing with Ryan, Lily and Jake fell a little behind. Ryan, distracted by his phone, didn't even notice when Jake slowed his pace to walk with Lily. They were talking about their future plans. Lily, still uncertain about what she wanted to do in college, expressed her insecurities. Jake, as always, listened attentively, and before she could continue, he reached out and lightly touched her shoulder, a comforting gesture. "You have time, Lily. You don't need to have it all figured out right now." The softness in his voice made her problems seem smaller, and the touch, though brief, sent a wave of warmth through her body. That small gesture left her completely speechless, and for a moment, all she could do was smile, trying not to show how much that touch had affected her. She felt torn. On one hand, she knew she shouldn't nurture her feelings. Jake saw her as Ryan's sister, someone younger, someone who, in his mind, probably didn't belong in his world. But on the other hand, there was something undeniable happening between them. Even if he didn't realize it, she felt it. And those small moments, those subtle touches and lingering glances, only fueled her hopes, even though she knew she was risking falling for someone who might never see her the way she saw him. In the days that followed, she found herself analyzing every interaction they had. Did he see her differently? Or was it just her imagination, her own desires clouding her perception of reality? With each new conversation, every smile exchanged, every accidental touch, Lily felt like she was sinking deeper into this sea of emotions that grew with each passing day. She wanted to believe that Jake felt something too, but at the same time, the thought that he didn't terrified her. Still, she couldn't help it. Her heart was already involved, and there was no turning back. Lily woke up every morning with the same feeling in her chest, a tightening sensation that seemed to grow stronger each day. She couldn't stop thinking about Jake. In the beginning, it was a subtle attraction, something she could ignore. But now, as weeks passed and their interactions became more frequent, her thoughts were increasingly consumed by him. No matter what she was doing, studying, hanging out with friends, or even watching TV with her family, her mind always returned to the moment she shared with him. When she closed her eyes, she could perfectly remember every detail. The sound of his laugh, the way he tilted his head slightly to listen to what she was saying, the looks they exchanged that made her heart race. It was as if everything around her had begun to revolve around him, and this left her torn between the thrill of being in love and the frustration of not knowing if he saw her the same way. However, along with this growing passion came a feeling of discomfort. Lily knew she was falling for someone who might never look at her the same way. As much as there were moments when she thought Jake might be feeling something too, those moments were always followed by a casual, almost indifferent attitude that made her doubt everything. He was always kind, even affectionate at times, but it never went beyond that. To him, it seemed she was still just Ryan's sister. And the closer they became, the harder it was for Lily to cope with the lack of the reciprocity she so desperately wanted. One night, As she lay in bed, Lily found herself thinking about how things might be different. What if Jake looked at her the way she looked at him? What would it feel like to have his hands holding hers? Or his lips meeting hers in the kiss she fantasized about so often? These images invaded her mind, leaving her breathless. She knew she shouldn't think this way, but she couldn't help it. Her feelings had grown in a way she had never experienced before, and now, simply being near him without being able to express what she felt left her more and more confused and restless. These fantasies began to interfere with her daily life. At school, she could barely concentrate on her classes. Her friends would talk about boys and relationships, but Lily couldn't join in the conversations because her mind was somewhere else. When Mia, her best friend, asked what was going on, Lily just shrugged, trying to play it off. She didn't want to admit to anyone what she was feeling. It was something that felt too big, too intense, and maybe even ridiculous, considering that Jake probably had no idea of her feelings. But the more she tried to ignore what she was feeling, the more it seemed to grow inside her. Being near Jake became a painful mix of joy and frustration. Every time he showed up at her house, her heart would race, and she could barely hold a conversation without getting nervous. But at the same time, after he left, all that remained was the emptiness of knowing that he probably didn't think about her the way she thought about him. One afternoon, while studying at the city library, Lily realized she was distracted again. The book open in front of her had been on the same page for over an hour, and her notes looked like meaningless scribbles. She sighed, frustrated with herself, and decided she needed a break. She got up and walked to the window, watching the people outside. It was a typical day in Seattle, with a cloudy sky and a light drizzle falling. The streets were busy, but for Lily, everything seemed distant, as if she were in a world apart. As she watched the movement outside, her phone buzzed in her pocket. When she picked it up, she saw a message from Jake. "Hey, are you home? I'm nearby and thought I'd drop by to see Ryan." Her heart skipped a beat when she read the message. It was a simple question, but coming from Jake, it meant so much more to her. Lily quickly typed a reply, trying to sound as casual as possible. "I'm not home right now, but I'll be back soon. Ryan's at work until later." She hit send and stared at her phone, anxiously waiting for a response. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. "How about we meet up somewhere? I'm off today." Lily blinked, incredulous. Jake wanted to meet with her, alone? Her heart raced, and she had to take a deep breath to calm herself before replying. "Sure. How about the cafe near the library? I'm close by." She sent the message before she could overthink it. Nervousness began to take over as she waited for a response, and when her phone buzzed again, she almost dropped it. "Perfect. See you there in 15 minutes." Lily felt a wave of excitement and panic all at once. She was about to meet Jake, alone, and although she knew he probably didn't see anything special in this, for her, it was monumental. Within minutes, she gathered her things and left the library, walking toward the cafe with her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, Jake was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He waved when he saw her come in, and Lily felt her stomach twist. He looked incredibly handsome, with his usual messy hair and a relaxed expression that only made her feel more nervous. Lily approached the table, trying to appear calm, but she could feel her face blushing. Jake smiled as she sat down, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to disappear. "Managed to escape from studying?" he asked playfully. She smiled, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. "Yeah, I needed a break. And you? Day off?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, I needed some time away from work, and I thought it would be nice to find someone to talk to." Lily tried to interpret his words, but couldn't shake the feeling that he had chosen her to spend this free time with. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that he wanted to be there with her. As they talked, the atmosphere between them began to shift. The words flowed more easily, and the smiles they exchanged were more frequent. Lily felt a sense of lightness, but at the same time, the unresolved tension between what she felt and what he showed continued to grow inside her. She wanted more, but didn't know how to break through that invisible barrier between them. When the conversation turned to more personal topics, Jake began talking about his professional challenges and how he sometimes felt pressured to follow paths that weren't exactly what he wanted. Lily listened attentively, trying to show that she was there for him. But at the same time, she was struggling with her own feelings that threatened to spill over. At one point, during a moment of silence while he stirred his coffee, Jake looked at her in a way that was different, more intense than usual. His gaze made Lily's heart race, and for a brief second, she had the impression that he might be feeling something too. But as quickly as it came, that intensity vanished, and Jake looked away as if nothing had happened. Lily bit her lip, trying to hold back the wave of emotions rising inside her. Being so close to him, having these moments of proximity without being able to express what she truly felt, was both thrilling and painful. She wanted more than these little fragments of attention. She wanted to know what it would be like if he really saw her the way she saw him. But for now, all she had were these small crumbs of affection, and she didn't know how much longer she could handle it. When they finally said goodbye at the end of the afternoon, with a quick hug and a promise to see each other soon, Lily walked back home with a heavy heart. She knew she was deeply invested, and with each passing day, that emotional distance between them was breaking her. Something had to change, but how? The night of the party arrived, and the Thompson house was filled with voices and laughter echoing through the halls. It was Ryan's birthday, and he had decided to throw a laid-back celebration with his closest friends. The house was full of people chatting, music playing softly in the background, and the smell of pizza and snacks in the air. Lily, although not exactly excited about the party, knew that Jake would be there, and that alone was enough to keep her heart restless all day. She had spent much of the afternoon choosing what to wear, not wanting to seem like she was putting in too much effort, but also not wanting to appear entirely casual. After many outfit changes, she settled on a simple dress that subtly highlighted her curves. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt a slight nervousness building inside her. What if tonight was different? What if something really changed between them? When she finally descended the stairs to join the others, the noise and movement distracted her for a moment. Ryan was surrounded by friends, cracking jokes and telling stories Lily had heard 1,000 times. She greeted some of Ryan's friends, but her eyes were searching for one person in particular. And then, there he was in the middle of the room, laughing at something someone had said. Jake looked different that night, more relaxed, as if completely at ease. He wore a dark shirt that accentuated his broad shoulders, and his hair, though slightly tousled, looked perfect. As soon as Jake saw her, his smile widened, and he waved in her direction. The simple gesture made Lily's stomach twist. She approached slowly, trying not to appear too eager, but when she finally reached him, it felt like the world around her disappeared. They exchanged a few words about the party, the laid-back atmosphere, and how Ryan always went overboard with his celebrations. But there was something different in Jake's gaze, something Lily couldn't quite define. He seemed to be paying more attention to her than usual, listening to every word she said with genuine interest. The night continued, and the guests began to scatter throughout the house. Some went to the porch, others to the kitchen, while a few remained in the living room. Lily, however, couldn't take her eyes off Jake. Whenever he was nearby, her heart raced, and she found herself wondering what he might be thinking. Did he feel this connection too? Or was it all just a creation of her own mind, wishing for something that might never become reality? At one point, after some time of chatting and laughing, Lily noticed that Jake had left the room. She discreetly stood up and followed him to the terrace, where he stood alone, leaning against the railing, gazing up at the night sky. The cool night breeze ruffled his hair, and the soft light of the moon illuminated his face in a nearly magical way. Lily hesitated for a moment before approaching, her heart pounding as she tried to control her growing nerves. "Are you enjoying the party?" she asked, trying to sound casual as she stood beside him. Jake smiled, still looking at the sky. "It's nice. I think your brother finally managed to throw a party that isn't as chaotic as the others." Lily laughed, remembering all the times Ryan had gone overboard with his parties. "Yeah, I guess he's learning with time." They fell silent for a few moments, simply enjoying the calm of the night in contrast to the buzz still coming from inside the house. There was something different about that night, a light but palpable tension that seemed to grow between them. Jake finally turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers in a way that felt intense, as if he were trying to figure something out. "You've changed, Lily," he said, his voice low and filled with something she couldn't quite identify. Her heart raced at the comment, unsure of what he meant by it. "Changed? What do you mean?" Jake looked at her for a few more seconds before turning his gaze back to the sky. "You're not that shy little girl I met anymore. I think somehow you've grown. I don't know how to explain it, but you seem stronger, more confident." Lily remained silent, absorbing his words. She had never imagined that Jake would see her this way, and it filled her with a mix of pride and nervousness. But at the same time, she knew he still didn't see her the way she saw him. To him, she was still Ryan's sister, someone he cared about, but not someone he had romantic feelings for. "Well, time does that to us, doesn't it?" she said, trying to keep her tone light, though her voice betrayed some emotion. She wanted to say more, to confess everything she was feeling, but the fear of ruining everything held her back. Jake was silent again, and for a moment, Lily thought the conversation had hit a dead end. But then, he suddenly turned and looked directly into her eyes, his eyes shining under the moonlight. "You've always been different, you know?" he said, his voice still low, but now with an intensity that made her hold her breath. Lily didn't know how to respond. What did he mean by that? Was he trying to tell her something more? Her mind raced with possibilities, but her words seemed stuck in her throat. Jake continued to look at her, and she felt that this moment could be decisive, that something was about to happen. "I've always admired the way you think, the way you care about people, how you see the world in a unique way," he said, taking a step closer, reducing the distance between them even more. "You're so much more than people realize, Lily." His words hit her with unexpected force. No one had ever spoken to her like that, especially not Jake. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed deafening, and for a brief second, she almost gave in to the urge to confess her feelings. They were so close now, their faces only a few inches apart, and Lily felt that if she wanted to, she could lean in and kiss him right then. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the fear of ruining everything, of breaking the friendship they had, or the fear that he didn't feel the same way. She bit her lip, trying to hold back the words that wanted to escape, while Jake continued to look at her, waiting for something she couldn't give in that moment. Finally, after a long and intense silence, Jake took a small step back, as if breaking the spell that had formed between them. "We should head back inside," he said softly, almost as if he were reluctant to end the moment. Lily nodded, still unable to speak, and followed him back into the house, feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment. For a moment, she had thought something might happen, that perhaps that night would be the beginning of something new between them. But at the same time, she knew she wasn't ready to take that step. Not yet. As they returned to the crowded living room, Lily glanced at Jake one last time, trying to figure out what he was thinking. He seemed calm, as always, but there was something in his eyes that made her believe that night had been important to him too. Maybe with time, things would change. Maybe, finally, he would see her the way she saw him. The days following that night on the terrace left Lily in a state of confusion. Every time she remembered Jake's words, how he had praised her so unexpectedly, her heart raced. She kept reliving that moment, trying to decipher the meaning behind every sentence, every look. Had he noticed something? Was he starting to see her differently? These questions hammered in Lily's mind, but she had no answers. The only thing she knew for sure was that her feelings for him were becoming impossible to ignore. Their encounters continued, but they never had a moment as intimate as the one on the terrace. Jake continued visiting the Thompson house as usual, and they exchanged glances and brief conversations, but nothing crossed the boundary of friendship. As much as she wanted to, Lily still didn't have the courage to talk about what she truly felt. And then, before she could even think about how to gather the courage, the announcement came like a cold shower. That afternoon, Jake was sitting in the kitchen with Ryan, talking about his future plans. Lily was on the other side of the kitchen, pretending to focus on a college assignment, but listening to every word. That was when Jake casually mentioned that he had gotten a job in New York. "It's an amazing opportunity," he said, smiling. "I'm going to work for a tech company there. I start next month." The words hit Lily like a punch in the stomach. New York? Jake was moving? She froze in place, unable to process the information. The sound of Ryan's laughter and his congratulations to Jake echoed in the background. But to Lily, everything seemed distant. Her heart pounded in her chest, and a silent panic began to take over her. Jake was leaving. He was going to another city, another life, and she still hadn't confessed her feelings. What if he left without ever knowing? What if he went away and met someone else? Someone who wasn't her? The thought terrified her. In the days following the announcement, Lily found herself in a whirlwind of emotions. Sometimes, she tried to convince herself that this was for the best, that maybe the distance would help her forget her feelings. But most of the time, all she could think about was that she was losing the chance to experience a love that never even had the chance to begin. Jake's imminent departure made every interaction between them more painful. She smiled when he made a joke, tried to act normal, but inside, she was falling apart. Jake, on the other hand, seemed excited about the move, eager to start a new chapter of his life. He talked about New York with a sparkle in his eyes, and every time he mentioned something about the city, Lily felt the ground opening beneath her feet. She knew she had to do something. She had to tell him how she felt before it was too late. But the fear of rejection, the fear of ruining whatever relationship they had, paralyzed her. Lily thought about it every night as she lay in bed, her mind wandering through scenarios of how things could be. She imagined confessing her love, him embracing her and saying he loved her too, that the distance between them would just be a detail to figure out. But at the same time, she imagined being rejected, seeing Jake become uncomfortable, pulling away even more, destroying any bond they had. Finally, one day, as she sat in her room, staring out the window and feeling the weight of Jake's impending departure, Lily made a decision. She would write a letter. If she didn't have the courage to say everything out loud, she would at least put her feelings on paper. It would give her a chance to organize her thoughts, to express everything she had been holding inside in a clear way. That way, at least, Jake would know how she felt. She sat at her desk with a piece of paper and a pen, and for a few seconds, just stared at the blank page. She didn't know where to begin. How do you start writing a love letter to someone who may have never thought of you that way? Finally, she took a deep breath and began to write. Jake, I'm not exactly sure how to put this into words, so I hope you can understand everything I'm trying to say here. I've never told you this before because I've always been afraid that it might change things between us, and I didn't want to risk losing your friendship. But with you leaving for New York, I feel like I can't keep this to myself anymore. The truth is, I love you. I've felt this way for a while now, and no matter how much I've tried to hide it, I don't think I can pretend these feelings don't exist anymore. You mean so much to me, more than I could ever explain, and knowing that you're leaving without knowing this makes my heart ache. I don't expect you to feel the same, and I'm not sure if this will change anything, but I needed you to know. At least this way, I won't feel like I'm hiding anymore. Lily reread the words she had written, feeling the weight of each sentence. It was a pure and honest confession, and she knew there was no turning back now that she had put her feelings into words. After carefully folding the letter, she placed it in an envelope and sealed it. The plan was simple. Give it to Jake before he left, so at least he would know how she felt, regardless of what it might mean for them. In the days leading up to Jake's departure, Lily's anxiety only grew. She kept the envelope hidden, waiting for the right moment, but fear of handing it over consumed her. What if Jake read the letter and never wanted to speak to her again? What if he thought it was all foolishness? These thoughts tormented her, and every time she thought about giving him the letter, a wave of insecurity made her hesitate. On the last night before Jake's flight to New York, Ryan organized a small farewell gathering for his friend, something intimate, just for their closest friends. Lily was there, smiling and laughing at the jokes as usual, but the letter in her coat pocket felt as heavy as a ton of bricks. She tried to find a moment to talk to Jake alone, but he was always surrounded by people, talking and saying his goodbyes. When the night finally began to wind down and the guests started to leave, Lily saw her opportunity. Jake was saying goodbye to Ryan near the door, and as he turned to leave, Lily felt her heart race. It was now or never. She started to walk toward him, the envelope almost burning in her hands, but at the last moment, something stopped her. Fear. Fear that he would read it and say nothing, or worse, that he would say something she didn't want to hear. She stopped halfway, watching as Jake said goodbye to Ryan and walked toward the door. He briefly turned back to wave at her, with the same kind smile as always. Lily waved back, feeling a wave of sadness and regret rise in her chest. And then, he was gone, without ever knowing that she loved him. That night, as Jake boarded his flight to New York, Lily lay in bed, staring at the untouched envelope. The words she so desperately wanted to say were still trapped on the paper, and she wondered if she would ever have the courage to truly give it to him. The days after Jake's departure dragged on for Lily. The house felt empty without his frequent visits, and although Ryan was always around, something was missing. Lily found herself replaying their last conversations, the last smile he gave her before walking out the door and heading to New York. It was a smile that now seemed distant, part of a memory she was trying to hold on to, but that slipped through her fingers like sand. During that first week, Lily tried to stick to her routine, immersing herself in her studies and hanging out with friends. However, Jake's absence was a constant in her mind, a painful reminder that she had missed the chance to confess her feelings. The letter was still tucked away in her drawer, untouched, with its words left unsaid. As much as she wanted to move on, Jake remained on her mind, becoming more present with each passing day. It was during one of those lonely nights, as she lay in bed, that her phone buzzed beside her. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and her heart immediately jumped at the sight of the message. "How are you?" Simple, direct, yet it stirred something in Lily. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, feeling a mix of nervousness and hope. He had remembered her, even though he was miles away. Though the message was brief, it was enough to ignite her imagination. Maybe he was thinking about her too. Maybe there was something between the lines. She took a deep breath and typed her response. "I'm good. How about you? How's New York?" She clicked send and stared at her phone, waiting for the reply as if her life depended on it. When the response finally came, it wasn't exactly what she had hoped for. "It's great here. The city is amazing, so different from Seattle." It was a polite reply, but impersonal, with no hint that he missed her or that there was anything more behind his words. Lily tried not to let it get to her, but the disappointment was inevitable. That flutter in her stomach she had felt when she saw the initial message quickly turned into a sense of frustration. Was this how it was going to be? Brief, polite conversations with no depth? She typed another response, trying to keep the tone light, but still hoping he would steer the conversation towards something more personal. "I can imagine. It must be crazy walking around there every day." This time, the reply took longer to come. When it finally appeared on the screen, it was even vaguer than before. "Yeah, it's really busy." Lily stared at the message for a moment, trying to process what was happening. The conversation was dying before it even began. Jake wasn't making an effort to engage, wasn't asking questions, or trying to continue the dialogue. It was as if he was keeping the conversation surface level, without opening up for more. This frustrated her even more. She wanted so badly for him to say something, anything, that would show he was thinking about her differently, but all he seemed to be doing was maintaining a certain distance. The messages between them continued like this over the following days. Jake always replied, but his responses were short, formal, as if he were speaking to an acquaintance, not someone who had been a part of his life for so long. He didn't seem interested in starting deeper conversations, and every time Lily tried to steer the topic towards something more personal, he deflected, changing the subject or ending the conversation politely. She couldn't help but feel like she was being kept in some kind of comfort zone, as if Jake wanted to stay in touch, but without getting emotionally involved. And that hurt her more than she was willing to admit. The physical distance between them was large, but the emotional distance seemed even larger. For Jake, it seemed easy to continue living his life in New York while she was left stuck in the uncertainty of what could have been. By the third week since he had left, Lily decided she couldn't keep living in this limbo. She needed to understand what was happening. So, that night, when he sent another casual message, she decided to be a bit more direct. "Are you enjoying your new job?" The reply came quickly, as usual. "Yeah, I am. It's challenging, but I'm learning a lot." Lily closed her eyes for a second, feeling the frustration grow inside her. She couldn't keep going like this. She needed to say something, even if it was subtle. So, with her heart racing, she typed, "I'm happy for you. You know, sometimes I miss our conversations. Things seem different now." She sent the message before she could second guess herself, her heart pounding as she waited for his reply. She knew she was taking a risk, but she couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine with this emotional distance between them. When the response came, it was even vaguer than she had expected. "Yeah, I miss Seattle too." Lily stared at the screen, feeling a lump form in her throat. He had completely ignored the part about their conversations, shifting the focus to the city as if it were something trivial. Reality began to sink into her thoughts. Maybe Jake didn't want anything more than this. Maybe he was just being polite, keeping in touch out of obligation, not out of a genuine desire to stay connected with her. As the days passed, their messages continued in this painfully superficial pattern. Lily tried to show more, tried to bring up the moments they had shared, but Jake kept the relationship on the surface, as if building an invisible wall. And the more he distanced himself, the more Lily's heart broke. She wanted to ask him directly what was going on, but the fear of hearing the answer, of discovering that he really didn't see her any differently, kept her from pushing further. One night, after yet another frustrating exchange of messages, Lily tossed her phone aside, feeling a wave of sadness wash over her. Why was he acting like this? Did everything they had shared mean so little to him? She knew she was emotionally invested in something that might never happen, but she couldn't stop. The desire for Jake to see her in a different light, for him to miss her too, consumed her. Lily began to realize that maybe she was holding on to something that only existed in her head. Maybe Jake really did see her only as Ryan's sister, a friend he liked, but nothing more. And while she tortured herself with the what-ifs, he seemed to be moving on, living his life in New York, without worrying about what he had left behind. The sporadic messages they exchanged became a constant source of frustration for Lily. Every time his name appeared on her phone, she felt a mix of hope and despair. She hoped he would finally say something that indicated he missed her, that he thought about her. But every polite response, every subtle deflection of the conversation, was like a cruel reminder that maybe he had never seen her the way she saw him. And as time passed, Lily began to wonder if she would ever have the courage to really ask him what was going on, or if she would continue living in this uncertainty, holding on to unspoken words and hopes that might never be reciprocated. The days continued to drag on, and with them, the void Jake had left in Lily's life seemed to grow. She tried to focus on her studies, on her daily college activities, but something always pulled her back to the moments they shared, to the words left unspoken, to the letter still hidden in her drawer. Even though Jake was so far away, he still seemed to be a part of her every thought, as if it were impossible to erase him from her mind. Lily threw herself into her studies in a desperate attempt to fill the space he had left. She spent hours in the library, her eyes glued to the pages of books, but at the same time, her mind wandered. The sound of conversations around her, the noise of chairs being dragged or people flipping through pages, everything felt distant. Deep down, she knew she was trying to escape, that concentrating on her studies was a way to silence the feelings that kept resurfacing whenever she thought about Jake. Lily's friends, worried about her withdrawn behavior, began insisting that she go out more, have fun, and try to meet new people. They thought she was simply overwhelmed with schoolwork and needed to relax. And maybe they were right, at least partly. Lily knew that if she continued to lock herself in her own thoughts, she would end up sinking deeper into the anguish that seemed to consume her nights. So, with some reluctance, she started accepting invitations to parties and outings with the group. One of those nights, while at a campus party, Lily found herself surrounded by laughter and lively conversations. The colorful lights and loud music made everything feel lighter, more distant from the sadness she carried inside. It was a night to try to forget, at least for a few hours, everything that had been tormenting her. She was with Mia and other friends, all laughing and joking as they watched the crowd. Every now and then, a guy would approach to talk, but despite smiling politely, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It was then that one of her classmates, Nathan, approached with 2 drinks in hand, offering one to Lily. He was nice, always cracking jokes during class, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her better. Even though she didn't feel that same spark she had when she saw Jake, Lily decided it might be a good idea to try. At least to see if she could, one day, feel something for someone else. They spent most of the night talking, and Nathan made her laugh more times than she could remember. He was funny and attentive, asking questions about her classes, her interests, and genuinely interested in her answers. At many moments, Lily almost allowed herself to believe that there could be something there, that maybe if she gave it a chance, she could move on. However, as the night progressed, something inside her began to pull back. As kind and polite as Nathan was, and even though the conversation flowed naturally, there was nothing that made her feel that warmth in her chest that she always felt when she was near Jake. The laughter was shallow, the conversations lacked the weight she longed for. And as she realized this, a feeling of guilt began to surface. She knew that Nathan was trying, but deep down, all Lily could think about was how things would be if she were there with Jake. When the party began to wind down and people started to leave, Nathan offered Lily a ride. She accepted, even though she knew it would only prolong the discomfort she felt. In the car, while Nathan talked about how much he had enjoyed spending time with her that night, Lily just smiled and nodded. She was grateful for his kindness, but the emptiness in her chest seemed to grow with every mile they traveled. When she arrived home, she thanked Nathan with a quick hug, and he looked at her with an expectant expression, as if waiting for something more. But Lily, unable to reciprocate, smiled gently and said goodbye before going inside. The door closed behind her, and with that, reality came crashing down. Lily threw herself onto her bed, feeling a wave of frustration and sadness. She knew Nathan deserved someone who could return what he was offering, but no matter how hard she tried, her heart was stuck somewhere else. It was still stuck with Jake. That night, alone in her room, Lily couldn't stop thinking about the letter she had never sent. The letter that could have changed everything, or at least given her a clear answer about Jake's feelings. She didn't know which was worse: living in uncertainty, not knowing what he really felt, or taking a risk and discovering that he would never love her the same way. Impulsively, Lily got up and went to her desk drawer. Her fingers hesitated for a second before opening it and pulling out the envelope that had been sitting there for so long. As she held the paper in her hands, she felt her heart race. How many times had she thought about sending it? And how many times had she backed out at the last moment? She opened the envelope and reread the letter, as if expecting the words on the page to have changed over time. But they were the same, raw and painful honesty, a clear reflection of her feelings for Jake. With each sentence, each confession, Lily felt the weight of everything she had never said aloud. And now, with Jake in New York, the physical distance only widened the emotional distance she had feared so much. For a brief moment, Lily considered sending the letter. After all, what did she have to lose? Jake was already far away, and maybe the letter could resolve the uncertainty that tormented her so much. If he didn't love her back, at least she would know and could finally try to move on. But on the other hand, if she sent the letter and he rejected her, she might destroy any chance of friendship or any connection that still existed between them. The dilemma consumed her. Lily held the envelope tightly, her fingers pressing against the paper as she glanced at her phone. It would be so easy to send a message, ask for his address, and mail the letter. But every time she prepared to type, the insecurity rushed back, pulling her down. And then, she gave up. Once again, she put the letter back in the envelope, closed the drawer, and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling as a solitary tear slid down her cheek. Jake was far away, and no matter how hard she tried, he continued to dominate her thoughts. No other guy could make her heart race the same way. No other smile could stir the same feelings. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a love that might never be returned. But at the same time, she couldn't let go. Jake was the person she loved, and until she had an answer, no matter how painful it might be, Lily knew he would continue to be the ghost that haunted all her days. Time passed slowly for Lily over the next 2 years. Although she had forced herself to move on focusing on her studies, going out with friends, even going on a few meaningless dates, Jake never completely disappeared from her thoughts. No matter how many times she tried to convince herself that she needed to leave him behind, he remained the invisible constant in her mind. The messages between them had become increasingly rare, and when they did happen, they were brief, formal, and lacking depth. This only deepened the sense that time was building an insurmountable barrier between them. And then, on an ordinary late afternoon, while Lily was in the university library, Her phone vibrated with a message that made her freeze. It was from Ryan. "Jake's coming back to town. He'll be staying for a few days. Think you can come by the house tomorrow night? We're having dinner." Lily was paralyzed for a moment, staring at the words as if she couldn't believe what she was reading. Jake was coming back? After all this time, he would be back in Seattle, and she would see him again. Immediately, a whirlwind of emotions hit her. Fear, anxiety, anticipation. What would he think of her now? What would she feel when she saw him after 2 long years of distance, where her feelings had mixed with uncertainty and longing? She quickly responded, confirming that she would come, but the rest of the day passed in a blur. The hours leading up to the reunion left her restless. She bounced from thought to thought, unable to concentrate on anything else. Would it be different now? Would he see her differently? Or worse, would she still be trapped in the same feelings while he continued to treat her with that same distant kindness? When the day of the dinner arrived, Lily prepared more carefully than usual. She chose a simple yet elegant dress and left her hair down, something she knew made her feel more confident. However, no matter how calm she tried to appear on the outside, inside, a storm of emotions raged. She didn't know what to expect from Jake, and more than that, she didn't know how to control what she felt. When she arrived at Ryan's house, the familiar sound of the door closing and the voices inside made her pause for a moment before entering. Jake was already there. She could hear him laughing and talking with Ryan, as if nothing had changed. But for Lily, everything had changed. She took a deep breath before opening the door and stepping inside. When her eyes met Jake's, for a brief second, the world stopped. He was sitting on the couch, looking exactly as she remembered, but at the same time, different. His hair was a bit shorter, his posture more confident. There was something about him that seemed more mature, more solid, as if the years had sculpted a more grown-up version of who he was. When he saw her, his smile immediately widened, and he stood up. "Lily," he said, crossing the room to greet her. "It's been so long." Lily's heart raced uncontrollably as she tried to control her expression. Seeing him up close, all the emotions she had suppressed for so long came rushing back in full force. She forced a smile, though her mind was spinning. "Jake, what a surprise to see you back," she said, her voice sounding a bit weaker than she'd hoped. They hugged briefly, and his touch made her lose herself for a second. It was the same Jake as before, yet he seemed different, more self-assured, more confident. When they pulled apart, Jake looked at her with a calm smile, but there was something in his eyes that made her wonder if he, too, was surprised by what he saw. The dinner was pleasant, with Ryan dominating most of the conversation, as usual. Jake and Lily exchanged occasional glances, but to her frustration, he kept the conversation at the same level as before, friendly, casual, with no indication that he saw her in a different light. However, something felt different in the atmosphere between them, something Lily couldn't clearly identify, but that made her heart race every time their eyes met. Maybe it was just her imagination, maybe it was just the desire for him to finally notice her differently, but the feeling was real. After dinner, Ryan excused himself for a work call, leaving Jake and Lily alone in the living room. The silence between them was comfortable, but loaded with a tension that hadn't existed before. Jake sat on the couch, his eyes fixed on the fireplace as the fire crackled softly. Lily, sitting in the nearby armchair, tried to summon the courage to say something, anything to break the ice. 2 years away. How was life in New York? She asked, her voice soft in the quiet room. Jake smiled slightly, as if thinking over his answer. It was intense. A lot of work, a lot of hustle. But it's an amazing city, full of opportunities. Lily nodded, though what she really wanted to ask was, "Did you miss me? Did you ever think about me?" But she knew she couldn't say that. Not now. "And you? How's everything here? College life? Everything different?" He looked at her with a curiosity that seemed more genuine than before, as if he was truly interested in how she had changed during that time. She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Finished college, got an internship. Nothing too exciting. Just life moving on." Jake looked at her a little longer this time, and for a moment, she felt he was seeing something beyond her superficial response. He was noticing the changes, perhaps recognizing that the girl he once knew had transformed. "You seem more confident, more sure of yourself." That comment caught her by surprise. It was something she hadn't expected to hear from Jake, and the fact that he had noticed deeply moved her. Lily smiled, feeling a wave of emotion rise within her. "Thank you," was all she could manage, her heart pounding. The silence between them returned, but this time it felt even heavier, more filled with unspoken feelings. Lily felt the air between them shift, as if something was about to happen. She looked at Jake, and for a moment, he seemed to be considering something, as if trying to decide whether or not to cross an invisible line. "I've missed this," he finally said, his voice soft but full of sincerity. "Being here, with you and Ryan. I miss this familiarity." Lily held her breath. Though he had included Ryan in the sentence, there was something about the way Jake looked at her that made her feel he was speaking directly to her. Her heart was in her throat now, and the words seemed stuck, unable to come out. "I missed you too," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Jake looked away for a brief second, as if he were wrestling with something inside. When he looked back at her, there was an intensity in his eyes that left her breathless. It was as if he were seeing her in a different light, as if he were beginning to recognize something he hadn't seen before. But, just like so many times before, the moment passed. Jake stood up, stretching slightly, as if trying to shake off the tension. "It's good to be back," he said, shifting the tone of the conversation back to the casual. Lily nodded, trying to hide the disappointment she felt. It was as if every time they were about to reach somewhere, something held them back from going further. She wanted so badly to break through this barrier between them, to say everything she had kept hidden for so long. But at the same time, the fear of ruining everything paralyzed her. As Jake said his goodbyes that night, giving her a brief, warm hug, Lily felt that there was still a long journey ahead. He was back, but she knew that the distance between them, even with them being so close, still existed. Jake's visit, which initially seemed brief, ended up lasting longer than Lily had expected. He had some commitments in Seattle, meetings with old friends, and work engagements, but he always found time to visit the Thompson house. Ryan, as usual, loved having his friend around, and soon the three of them began spending more time together, which only increased the tension growing between Jake and Lily. Now 20 years old, Lily was much more confident in herself. She had matured, both personally and professionally, since the last time Jake had seen her. Although she tried to maintain a calm and carefree facade, every time they were in the same room, she could feel the air grow heavier, filled with a tension that seemed to build with each passing day. It was subtle, like a spark of electricity in the air, something they both felt, but neither seemed willing to acknowledge. One afternoon, Ryan suggested they go to a nearby cafe. It was a place they used to frequent back in the day, and Ryan wanted to relive some memories. Jake agreed, and Lily was pulled along, trying to hide her growing nervousness. The cafe was cozy, with soft lighting and ambient music that made the space feel almost intimate. As they sat down, Ryan began talking about old times, the pranks he and Jake pulled in their teenage years. Lily listened, laughing at the stories, but her mind was elsewhere. Jake sat next to her, and with every laugh, every casual gesture, something inside Lily stirred. He seemed closer than usual, and several times during the conversation, their eyes met for brief seconds, but long enough to make her heart race. It was as if the space between them was slowly shrinking, though neither of them was willing to admit it. Ryan, always so wrapped up in his own stories, didn't notice the silent exchange of glances happening around him. But for Lily, each time Jake's eyes met hers, it was as if the world around her blurred for a moment. There was something in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just the usual casual look. It was deeper, more intense, as if he were trying to understand what he really felt. When Ryan stepped outside to take a work call, leaving the two alone, the silence that followed was almost suffocating. Jake, who had been smiling, suddenly grew serious. He looked at Lily, but this time he didn't look away. There was something in the air, something she couldn't name, but that made her heart beat faster. "You've changed a lot, Lily," Jake finally said, his voice low, but filled with meaning. She smiled shyly, though inside she was in a whirlwind of emotions. "I guess we've all changed, haven't we?" Jake nodded, but his eyes stayed on hers. "Yeah, but you're different. More mature, more confident." Lily felt her cheeks flush. What did he mean by that? Was he really starting to see her differently? "I've grown up," was all she could manage to say, her voice softer than she intended. Jake looked down for a moment, as if wrestling with something inside. When he looked back at her, his face was more serious. "These past 2 years, it's been strange not seeing you as much. I thought about you a lot." The unexpected confession caught Lily off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. What did this mean? Did he really miss her? Or was it just the nostalgia of a friend? "I thought about you too," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "A lot." The silence that followed was charged, yet intimate, as if they both knew they were on the verge of something, but still didn't have the courage to take the next step. Jake looked away for a moment, as if trying to sort out his thoughts, and Lily felt a wave of anxiety. Was he regretting saying that? Was he trying to pull back? Before she could say anything more, Ryan returned, breaking the tension in the air like a flash of light through a storm. He resumed the conversation with his usual enthusiasm, and Jake, though quieter, tried to keep up. But something had shifted in that brief moment. Lily knew it, and from the look Jake gave her when they were leaving the cafe, she was certain that he felt it too. In the days that followed, the tension between them only increased. Jake was always around, always close, but now there was a carefulness in their interactions, as if they both knew they were walking on dangerous ground. Ryan remained oblivious, and Lily didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. On one hand, it was good that he wasn't noticing what was happening, but on the other hand, it left Jake and Lily in a sort of limbo, where they both wanted to take the next step, but something held them back. One afternoon, while Ryan was out, Jake showed up at the Thompson house unannounced. Lily was alone in the garden, reading a book and enjoying the sun, when she heard the front door open. She turned and saw Jake standing in the doorway, a carefree smile on his face, but his eyes betrayed something more. "Ryan's not home," she said, standing up. "He had to go out to handle a few things." Jake nodded, but made no move to leave. "Actually, I didn't come here for him. I wanted to see if you were home." Jake's words made Lily's stomach flip. He had come to see her? Just her? She tried to hide the excitement building inside her, forcing a casual smile. "Well, here I am." Jake laughed, walking toward her slowly. "Mind if I sit?" She nodded, and they both sat at the small table in the garden, side by side, while a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees around them. The silence between them was full of meaning, but this time it was different. It was a comfortable silence, as if they both knew they didn't need words to understand each other. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the cafe," Jake began, his voice soft but serious. Lily looked at him surprised. She thought he had left that conversation behind, but it seemed he had been dwelling on it as much as she had. "About what, exactly?" "About you thinking of me," he replied, his eyes locked on hers. "I've thought about you a lot too, Lily. Maybe more than I should have." Her heart raced at his confession. There was something in his tone that made it feel like he was on the verge of saying something important, something that could change everything between them. But at the same time, there was hesitation in his voice, as if he were fighting against it. "Jake," Lily began, but the words failed before she could continue. He looked away for a moment, taking a deep breath. "It's hard for me. I see you, and it's impossible not to notice how much you've changed. But at the same time, I feel stuck because I'm your brother's friend, and that complicates things." The admission visibly troubled him, and Lily felt a mix of hope and frustration. He was admitting he felt something, but at the same time, he was holding back, and that indecision was tearing her apart inside. "Jake, She stopped, feeling the emotion rise to the surface, but before she could continue, he suddenly stood up, as if needing to step back before saying something he shouldn't. "I'm sorry, Lily. I shouldn't have said anything." And with that, he walked away, leaving Lily alone in the garden with the sound of the breeze and her racing heart, feeling like they were getting closer to something inevitable, but still not knowing how to reach it. The night was particularly calm, with cool, light air, carried by a soft breeze that announced the arrival of autumn. The streets of Seattle were illuminated by faint streetlights, casting long, silent shadows. Lily sat on a bench in the small park near her house, watching the leaves of the trees sway gently in the wind. She hadn't expected to see Jake that night. After what had happened in the garden days earlier, Their interactions had been tense, yet laden with a simmering expectation that seemed ready to explode at any moment. She tried not to think too much about it, but the thoughts haunted her constantly. The way Jake had looked at her in the garden, how his words, even hesitant, had revealed more than he was willing to admit. Lily knew something was changing between them, but what confused her the most was Jake's resistance. He was stuck on the idea of being just her brother's friend, and it was stopping him from admitting what he truly felt. But she knew, felt it with every fiber of her being, that he was struggling with his feelings. Suddenly, the sound of soft footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She turned and saw Jake slowly approaching. Lily's heart raced, as it always did when he was around. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with electricity as he got closer, and Lily realized she had no idea what to say. He hadn't told her he was coming. The simple fact of seeing him there, on that night, caught her completely off guard. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said with a soft smile, though his eyes revealed something deeper. "I needed some time alone, to think," Lily replied, trying to control the avalanche of emotions his presence always stirred. Jake nodded and sat beside her on the bench, saying nothing more for a moment. The silence between them was almost deafening, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence full of meaning, of unspoken things, of repressed feelings. Lily knew Jake wasn't there by accident. There was something he wanted to say, something he was struggling to keep inside, but that was somehow slipping out. "I've been thinking a lot over the last few days," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "About what happened, about what I said, and about what I didn't say." Lily felt her heart quicken, her hands beginning to sweat slightly as she tried to stay calm. She looked at him, waiting for him to continue, her chest filled with a mix of anxiety and hope. Jake stared at the ground, as if trying to find the right words. "It's hard for me," he continued, still avoiding her eyes. "I'm here with you, and I try to act normal. I try to see you the way I always have, but something's changed. I've changed, and so have you." His words seemed to echo in the silence around them, penetrating deep into Lily's thoughts. She knew exactly what he meant. She had changed too. What had once been a contained affection was now something much stronger, more tangible. The air around them felt thicker, as if they were on the verge of crossing an invisible, but incredibly dangerous line. "Jake," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "if it's so hard, why do you keep trying to suppress it? Why can't you admit what you're feeling?" He finally looked up, meeting her eyes, and in that moment, Lily knew there was something much bigger happening inside him. Jake's eyes were full of emotion, of a confusion she could clearly see. It was as if he was on the verge of letting go, but at the same time, fighting not to. "Because it's not simple," he replied, his voice rougher now, loaded with something he seemed to be trying to control. "You're Ryan's sister. I've been friends with him for so long, and I can't cross that line." Lily felt a wave of frustration rise within her. Why did he keep clinging to that? Why couldn't he see that, regardless of Ryan, there was something real between them? "You're gonna let that friendship stop you from being honest about what you feel?" she asked, her voice firmer now. "Are you gonna let that keep us apart?" Jake didn't respond immediately, and the silence that followed was heavy with tension. They looked at each other, Jake's eyes full of conflict, while Lily waited for any sign that he was ready to give in. And then, something changed. Jake's expression softened, but his eyes grew more intense, more focused. Lily felt her heart stop for a second as he leaned slightly closer to her. "I shouldn't do this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Before Lily could respond, Jake leaned in, and in a smooth, deliberate movement, his lips met hers. The kiss was sudden, but at the same time, it felt like it had been anticipated for a long time. It was an explosion of emotions, a mixture of repressed desire and overwhelming passion that erupted the moment their lips touched. Lily let herself get lost in the sensation, her thoughts disappearing as the heat of Jake's presence enveloped her entire body. The kiss was intense, as if years of contained feelings had finally found a way to be released. She could feel the urgency in Jake's movements, the way he pulled her closer, as if he needed her to breathe. His hands found her waist, and Lily felt her whole body ignite. Every touch, every movement a reminder of how much she had wanted this moment. But as quickly as it began, the kiss ended. Jake pulled back abruptly, his eyes wide, as if he had just realized what he had done. He looked at her with a mixture of regret and confusion, and for a second, Lily didn't know what to do. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in, and the expression on Jake's face made her feel as if she were falling from a great height. I shouldn't have done that, he said, his voice low and filled with guilt. Lily, still tasting his lips on hers, blinked, trying to process what was happening. Jake, I'm sorry, he interrupted, standing up quickly. I can't. This can't happen. He took a few steps back, as if he needed space, as if he were trying to run from something that was consuming him inside. Lily remained seated, stunned, unable to understand how everything had changed so quickly. Jake, wait, she began, standing up and trying to reach for his hand. Why can't it? We both know what this means. Why are you running? He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain and regret. Because I can't. I can't do this to you. Not with Ryan. Not now. And then, before Lily could say anything else, Jake turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the bench, with the feeling that something had broken between them. She wanted to scream, to run after him, but her legs felt glued to the ground. All she could do was watch as he disappeared into the darkness of the night. The kiss, which for a brief moment had seemed to be the answer to all her questions, now left Lily with even more doubts. What did it mean? Why had he pulled away so abruptly? She was devastated, lost in a sea of uncertainties and questions that seemed to have no end. The feeling of emptiness consumed Lily as soon as Jake disappeared into the night. She sat on the bench for several minutes, unable to process what had just happened. Her lips still tingled from the kiss, and her heart pounded in her chest, as if it had been ripped out. It wasn't just the fact that Jake had kissed her, it was how he had pulled away immediately afterward, leaving her alone, lost in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She tried to understand what was going through his mind. Why had he taken such a passionate step, only to retreat immediately, as if what he had done was wrong? And why couldn't he see what was so clear to her? Jake was running from something, but what exactly? Was it really fear of Ryan, or was there something else he wasn't sharing? In the days that followed, Jake's behavior became even more confusing. He avoided Lily as much as he could, and his visits to the Thompson house became drastically fewer. When he did come, he stayed for the shortest time possible, always making excuses about commitments or needing to leave early. Gone were the lingering glances filled with unspoken meanings. Now, he barely looked her in the eyes, as if avoiding confronting the truth the kiss had revealed. He acted as though nothing had happened, as though that night hadn't changed everything between them. For Lily, each encounter was a new wound. She desperately wanted to understand what was happening, but every time she tried to get close to Jake, he shut down, making it clear he wasn't ready to deal with the situation. The implicit rejection in his distance was a painful blow, and each day that passed, Lily felt more lost, more confused. She couldn't forget the kiss the way he had held her, how their lips had met with a passion that couldn't be ignored. That moment had been real, and his desire had been real too. But now, he was pulling away, and she didn't know how to handle it. One morning, Ryan found her sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes lost in a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He sat down beside her, noticing the exhaustion on her face. Is everything okay, Lil? You've seemed distant lately. She looked at her brother, feeling a pang of guilt. Ryan didn't know anything. He had no idea what was happening between her and Jake, and although he had always been a loving and protective brother, Lily knew he wouldn't understand the complexity of the situation. How could she explain to him that she was in love with his best friend? And, even worse, how could she explain that Jake had kissed her, only to pull away afterward, leaving her in this emotional limbo? I'm just tired, she responded, forcing a smile. A lot going on? Ryan nodded, not suspecting anything, but gave her a worried look. Maybe you should take a break, go out more. You've been cooped up at home too much. Lily agreed, but there was no energy in her words. The thought of going out and trying to distract herself seemed exhausting, as if nothing outside that house could fill the void Jake had left. Every time she tried to focus on something else, he returned to her thoughts. And the worst part was not knowing what was going through his mind. Then, that afternoon, while Lily was sitting in the living room, distracted by the noise of the TV, Ryan rushed through the door, with a surprised expression that immediately caught her attention. "Did you know Jake is going back to New York tomorrow?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. "Tomorrow?" The word escaped her lips as a whisper. "But he was supposed to stay longer, wasn't he?" Ryan shrugged. "That's what he said at first, but it seems like something changed. He told me he has some urgent things at work, so he needs to leave earlier." The news hit Lily like a punch to the stomach. Jake was leaving. He was going back to New York, running away from everything that had happened between them. No explanations, no attempt to resolve what they had started. The pain hit her all at once, and she stood up abruptly, not knowing exactly what to do. "You knew about this?" Ryan asked, now more attuned to his sister's reaction. "No, I didn't know," she stammered, feeling the tears begin to form in her eyes. She needed to get out of there, needed space to think. What was Jake doing? How could he just leave after everything? Without saying another word, Lily left the room and went to her bedroom, closing the door behind her with force. Her heart raced, and the tears finally spilled down her face. She didn't know what to do. What did Jake want? Why was he leaving her? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered, without comfort. She felt betrayed, abandoned. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. The thought of Jake leaving the next day, without even speaking to her, left her unbearably anxious. How could he just pretend that nothing had happened? And why was he running away? She needed answers. She couldn't let him go without understanding what was happening. But at the same time, the fear of confronting him, of hearing something that might break her heart even more, paralyzed her. When the morning finally came, Lily dragged herself to breakfast, but she could barely swallow anything. Ryan had already left for work, and she knew that Jake was probably at his house, preparing to leave. The thought of letting him go without saying anything consumed her. After all this time, keeping her feelings hidden, she couldn't let everything end like this, in silence. Without thinking too much, Lily grabbed her coat and left the house. She walked quickly through the streets, feeling the autumn chill on her face, but she didn't care. All that mattered was getting to Jake before it was too late. She didn't know what she would say when she saw him, but she knew she had to try. She had to fight for him, for them, even if it hurt her even more. When she arrived at Jake's house, she hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. Her heart was pounding, and her hands trembled slightly. When the door finally opened, and Jake appeared, Lily felt a wave of emotions wash over her. He seemed surprised to see her there, but his face quickly closed off, as if he knew what she was about to say. "Lily," he began, but she interrupted him, her voice trembling with pain. "You were going to leave without talking to me? Without even trying to resolve what happened?" Jake took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. I thought it would be easier this way." "Easier?" She stepped forward, unable to contain the anger and sadness she felt. "You think it's easier just to run away? To pretend nothing happened? Jake, you kissed me. You know what that means. And now, you're just leaving?" He looked away, as if trying to avoid the intensity of her words. "Lily, I didn't want to complicate things. I don't know how to handle this. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Her words came out as an incredulous whisper. "Do you really believe that?" Jake finally looked her in the eyes, and she saw the pain reflected in his gaze. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lily. I don't know what I feel, and it scares me. I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to lose Ryan." "You're already hurting me," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "But you know what you feel. You're just afraid to admit it." For a moment, Jake remained silent, the internal battle he was facing evident in every line of his face. But instead of fighting for them, he simply shook his head, defeated. I have to go. I'm sorry." And with that, he left her. Again, Lily stood at the door, watching as Jake walked away, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Lily stood frozen at the door, the cold morning wind hitting her, though she barely felt it. Jake was walking away quickly, and all she wanted was to scream, to ask him to stop, to come back, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. Every step he took felt like a stab in her chest, a deep, sharp pain she had never felt before. Tears started rolling down her face silently as she watched his figure disappear into the distance, without turning back, without looking at her. When the door finally closed, the emptiness inside Lily became unbearable. The house felt colder and more desolate than ever. She slid down to the floor, leaning against the wall, feeling the crushing weight of reality hit her with overwhelming force. He was gone. Once again, Jake had left her, with no answers, no clear explanations, and no chance to fix what had broken between them. And for the first time, Lily didn't have the strength to fight anymore. She was exhausted. Exhausted from waiting for Jake to admit his feelings. Tired of holding on to the hope that, at some point, he would stop running. The hours that followed were a blur. Lily shut herself in her room, not wanting to leave, not having the energy to face the world. Messages from Mia and her other friends went unanswered, and even when Ryan knocked on her door, concerned about her silence, Lily pretended to be asleep, unable to deal with any conversation. She knew Ryan didn't understand what was going on, and deep down, that made her feel even more alone. The only person who could understand Jake was now thousands of miles away, both physically and emotionally. The days dragged by, monotonous and slow. Lily tried to focus on her studies, but every page she read felt distant, disconnected from her reality. Every time she tried to concentrate, Jake's image came back to her mind, the way he had kissed her, the way he had held her, how his lips had expressed everything his words had never said. But at the same time, the memory of how he had pulled away afterward destroyed her. Jake had left her with questions that would never be answered, and she didn't know how to move forward with so much left unresolved. One quiet afternoon, days after Jake had left, Lily absent-mindedly picked up her phone and opened the photo gallery. There, among the dozens of pictures she had avoided looking at in recent days, were the old photos, pictures of the three of them, her, Ryan, and Jake, during carefree moments, with bright smiles on all their faces. She remembered the genuine happiness of those days, how Jake's presence brought a lightness that made the world seem like a better place. But now, each of those photos was a painful reminder of what would never be more than a friendship to him. As she scrolled through the screen, one particular photo made her pause. It was a picture Ryan had taken on an ordinary day. Jake was standing next to her, and although he was smiling, his eyes were looking at Lily in a way she now understood differently. There had been something in that look, a repressed feeling, something he had perhaps tried to hide, but that had always been there, and she had never noticed. It hit her like a wave of both clarity and pain. Feeling the weight of longing, Lily, almost without thinking, typed out a message to Jake. She knew he was in New York by now, probably back to his routine, to his life far away from hers. The message was simple, yet carried all the emotion she felt. "Why did you run?" She sent it before she had the chance to change her mind. The words seemed to echo on the screen as she waited, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she shouldn't expect a reply, but she couldn't help it. The emptiness, the absence of any explanation, was suffocating. Lily needed to understand, even if it hurt her more. Minutes passed, then hours, and still silence. Jake didn't reply. Maybe he never would. She knew he might just ignore the message, just as he had ignored the feelings that had existed between them. And in a way, that would be the final blow. If he didn't respond, it would be like confirming that everything that had happened meant nothing to him. That night, lying in bed, Lily stared at the ceiling, feeling more lost than ever. She knew that, eventually, she would have to move on. But how? How do you rebuild after a broken heart? How do you find the strength to forget someone who has never truly left you? She turned to the side, still holding her phone in her hand, as if expecting it to vibrate with a response at any moment. But the phone remained silent, and the world around her seemed to follow the same path. The hours crept by, and when Lily finally fell asleep, it was a restless sleep, full of hazy dreams and fragments of memories she wished she could forget. The next morning, still without a response from Jake, Lily tried to get back to her life. She went out with Mia for coffee, pretending to be okay, laughing at her friends' jokes, but everything felt forced. A part of her was still stuck in that moment, in that silent, painful goodbye. Even when she kept herself busy with other things, the thought of Jake constantly crept back into her mind. He was like a ghost, haunting every corner of her thoughts, reminding her of everything that could have been. Days later, when Lily least expected it, her phone vibrated. She was in the middle of a class at college, barely paying attention to the professor's explanation, when she felt the buzz on the table. When she looked at the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Jake. "I didn't run from you. I ran from myself." Lily read the words over and over again, trying to make sense of what they meant. It wasn't a complete explanation, but it was something that indicated he was lost too, that maybe he was struggling with his own feelings. But it didn't take away the pain he had caused. How could he say he hadn't run from her when that's exactly what it felt like? He had left, without a real goodbye, without trying to resolve what had happened between them. Still, that message sparked something inside her. A small hope, a flicker that maybe things weren't entirely lost. But Lily knew she couldn't live on hope alone. She needed more concrete answers, something more than vague, cryptic messages. She needed Jake to be honest, to stop hiding behind his fears. But the question was, would he be capable of that? In the days that followed, Lily didn't reply. She needed time to process. She was tired of being the only one fighting to keep this alive. Jake needed to fight for her, for them too. Otherwise, nothing would change. And Lily, despite all the pain, knew she deserved more than scraps of attention. She deserved something real. Time passed, but the uncertainty still lingered. Jake was far away, but his impact on her life remained immense. And although there was a small hope in the back of her heart, Lily knew that it would take something much bigger than a short message to truly believe that Jake was ready to face whatever was between them. Lily knew she couldn't live in uncertainty forever. The days had dragged on since Jake left, and despite her attempts to get on with her routine, something inside her screamed for answers. The cryptic message he had sent echoed in her mind. "I didn't run from you. I ran from myself." But that wasn't enough. It wasn't the full explanation, and, more importantly, it wasn't what she deserved to hear. After weeks of introspection, endless conversations with Mia, and sleepless nights, Lily made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer for answers that might never come. If Jake didn't have the courage to face the situation, she would. She would go to him. The trip to New York was impulsive, something Lily had never imagined herself doing. But as she sat on the plane, watching the clouds pass by, she felt a quiet determination settle within her. The questions that had haunted her for so long now needed to be resolved. She had to know, even if the answer broke her heart. Jake had kissed her, then left, fleeing without giving her a chance to talk about what had really happened. It wasn't fair, and she didn't want to live in the shadow of uncertainty any longer. New York greeted her with its constant movement, its bright lights, and the overwhelming sense of a city that never stops. But inside, Lily felt the opposite. While the city was vibrant, she felt calm. Her purpose was clear, and as difficult as it would be, she knew she needed to confront Jake. She hadn't told him she was coming. He wasn't expecting her, and perhaps that was the only way to stop him from running again. After getting his address from Ryan, under the guise of a surprise visit, Lily went to Jake's apartment. The building he lived in was simple but elegant, reflecting the practical style Jake had always had. As she rode up the elevator, nervousness crept into her calm, but she forced herself to stay focused. It was now or never. When she reached his door, her heart was racing. She hesitated for a brief moment before knocking, hearing the muffled sound of his footsteps approaching from the other side. When the door opened, Jake stood there for a second, clearly surprised to see her. His eyes widened briefly, but he quickly regained his composure. "Lily?" he asked, incredulous, but with a confused smile that quickly faded when he saw the seriousness in her expression. She didn't want to start with pleasantries or pretend this was a casual visit. She was there for a reason, and that moment needed to happen. "I needed to see you, Jake. We need to talk." Jake stepped back, opening the door a little wider so she could come in. The apartment was neat, minimalist, with the soft light of late afternoon streaming in through large windows. Lily noticed the silence that filled the space, contrasting with the hustle and bustle of the city outside. As the door closed behind them, the tension in the air intensified. Jake watched her, clearly uncomfortable, as if he knew what was coming but still wasn't ready. "Lily," he began, but she interrupted, determined. "No, Jake. You're going to listen to what I have to say this time. I flew here because I'm tired of being in the dark. You kissed me, then you ran. You didn't give me an explanation or a chance to understand what was happening. And then you just left for New York without looking back." She spoke with a firmness that even surprised herself, her words laden with the frustration that had built up inside her. Jake looked down for a moment, as if trying to absorb everything she was saying. When he met her gaze again, there was a mix of regret and something deeper in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly, his voice low. "I know I was a coward. I shouldn't have done that to you. And even less should I have left without saying anything. But I was confused, Lily. I still am." The word confused irritated her. Lily took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Confused? Jake, we both know what happened between us wasn't a mistake. That kiss wasn't an impulse you can just ignore. And now you want to keep acting like you're lost, like you don't know what you want. Because I know what I want. I know what I feel." Jake seemed frozen, caught between the desire to say something and the uncertainty of what he should do. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she knew well, always a sign he was struggling with something difficult. "I feel something for you, Lily," he finally admitted, his voice full of sorrow. "I always have, but our story, the way this happened, Ryan, the age difference, all of it complicates things. It's not simple." Her heart raced at those words. So, he was admitting it. Jake was confessing that there was something between them, that his feelings were real. But at the same time, the confusion he showed only frustrated her more. "Complicated?" She repeated, incredulity lacing her voice. "You think it's complicated because I'm Ryan's sister? Because I'm younger than you?" "Jake, those are excuses. What's really stopping you from being honest about your feelings? Because this isn't about Ryan. It's not about our age difference." She waited, her eyes locked on his, searching for an answer that would finally break the deadlock between them. Jake seemed to wrestle with himself, the internal conflict clearly visible on his face. He took a step closer to her, so close that Lily could feel the warmth of his presence. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm scared of hurting you. Scared of starting something and not being able to handle it. I'm not perfect, Lily, and I don't know if I can be what you need." Those words hit her in an unexpected way. Jake's fear was so simple, yet so complex. He was sabotaging himself, letting his insecurities stop him from experiencing something that could be amazing. "Jake," she said softly, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. "You don't need to be perfect. I never wanted perfection. I just want you to be honest. With me, and with yourself." Jake looked deeply into her eyes, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he was about to give in. He leaned in slightly, his eyes on hers, as if he was about to do something, but then he pulled back. The conflict within him was still visible, still torn between desire and fear. "I don't know if I can," he murmured, his voice filled with deep sadness. "I don't know if I can risk it." Lily felt a wave of disappointment, but at the same time, a sense of understanding began to form. She knew Jake was fighting his own demons, that his fear wasn't about them, but about himself. But in that moment, she realized that she couldn't wait for him to resolve it all on his own. "I understand," she said, stepping back, "but I can't keep waiting for you to decide whether you're going to face this or not. I know what I want, and if you don't, I'll move on. Because as much as I love you, I can't stay trapped by your fear." The word love hung in the air, and Jake stared at her, shocked. She had never said it before. She had never admitted so directly what she felt. And as much as it hurt her, Lily knew she had to be honest with herself. Jake looked more torn than ever. On one hand, she saw the desire in his eyes, the recognition that his feelings were real. But on the other hand, the fear of risking it, of hurting her, still held him back. And Lily knew that, as much as she wanted to, she couldn't force him to face it. "I need time," Jake said, his voice trembling slightly, "to figure out what I feel, to figure out what I can really offer you." Lily nodded, even though it broke her heart a little more. She stepped back, the distance between them growing again. "I love you, Jake, but I can't wait for you forever." Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his fears. And for the first time, despite everything, Lily felt that there was something liberating about moving forward. Lily couldn't stop replaying everything that had happened in Jake's apartment. Every word spoken, Every glance exchanged swirled in her mind relentlessly. The confrontation had been painful, but necessary. She had needed to express everything she felt, and even though Jake had admitted his feelings, there was still a barrier between them. Even though her love for him was so clear, her decision to move on had shattered her heart. But Lily knew she couldn't stay trapped in Jake's uncertainty any longer. After that tense conversation, Lily returned to the hotel where she was staying, trying to calm the storm inside her. The lights of New York glittered outside, but nothing seemed capable of pulling her out of the whirlwind of emotions. She paced back and forth in the room, replaying the touch of his hand, the weight of his confession, and the conflict she had seen in his eyes. Hours passed, and she kept convincing herself she had made the right choice. Jake needed time to face his fears. However, the frustration and longing consumed her like an unquenchable flame. There was no denying what existed between them, and no matter how hard she tried to move on, the emptiness he left behind could not be filled. In the middle of the night, as she lay in bed, almost giving in to exhaustion, a persistent knocking at the door startled her. Lily got up, surprised and confused, not knowing who could be there at that hour. When she opened the door, she found Jake standing in front of her. His eyes were intense, determined, and his breathing was quick, as if he had run to get there. His hair was slightly disheveled, and his face, illuminated by the dim hallway lights, was a mixture of emotions she couldn't fully read. "Lily, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened, about what you said." Jake's voice was rough, heavy with emotion. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I need to talk to you. I need to say what I wasn't able to say before." Lily's heart pounded in her chest, as if she stood at a crossroads, and his words only tightened the knot of tension she felt. "Jake, if you came here to tell me you're still confused, I can't keep. I'm not confused anymore." He interrupted her with a firmness that made her pause. Jake's eyes, locked onto hers, were different now. There was no more hesitation, no more uncertainty that he had tried so hard to hide. "I've been a coward for too long, running from everything. But after you left, I realized I can't lose you, Lily. I can't keep hiding behind excuses." Lily stood silent, processing his words. The confusion and uncertainty seemed to dissolve, giving way to something deeper, something she had longed to hear from the start. "So, what do you want, Jake? What do you really feel?" Jake took a deep breath, and with a quick movement, he cupped her face in his hands, moving close enough for Lily to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I love you," he whispered, his eyes shining with raw honesty. "I always have, ever since I realized how much you mean to me. I was afraid to admit it, afraid of losing Ryan, of hurting you. But more than anything, I was scared of feeling what I feel for you." Lily couldn't stop the lump in her throat as she heard those words. Relief, emotion, everything mixed together as she looked at him, realizing that Jake had finally reached the conclusion she had been waiting for. "Jake?" Before she could say anything else, he pulled her closer, sealing her lips with a kiss filled with desire, but also with a deep tenderness, as if all the time they had spent apart had built up everything they felt. The kiss was intense, overwhelming, but different from before. This time, there was no hesitation, no guilt, just surrender. Jake held her with a firmness that showed how committed he was to this moment, to her. Lily felt her whole body respond to his touch, a mixture of relief and passion running through every part of her. They parted briefly, breathless, but before either could speak, Jake pulled her in again, this time with even more intensity. He led her back into the room, closing the door behind them. The silence between them was now broken only by their quickened breaths, and Lily couldn't think of anything but Jake's presence, so close, so real. Clothes were slowly cast aside, and his touch, now free of barriers and fears, made Lily feel completely alive. Every caress was a reminder of everything they had repressed for so long, of everything they could have been, and now, finally, were living. Jake laid her down on the bed with care, as if he wanted to savor every moment, and his eyes never left hers. There was no more doubt, no more fear, only the undeniable desire to be together. That night was complete surrender, a meeting of bodies and hearts that had been delayed by fear and insecurity. Every movement, every touch, was charged with an emotion that went beyond simple physical attraction. It was the union of two souls that had, for so long, denied what they felt but could no longer ignore. The warmth of Jake's body against hers, the way he looked at her, the way he touched her, made all the previous uncertainties and pain fade away. At that moment, nothing mattered except the love they were finally ready to live. When it was over, they lay side by side, still catching their breath, their bodies intertwined. Jake pulled her closer, wrapping her in a quiet embrace. Lily nestled against him, listening to the sound of his heartbeat, still racing. There was something incredibly comforting in the way he held her now, as if he wanted to make sure she knew that, this time, he wasn't going anywhere, that he wasn't running anymore. "I should have done this a long time ago," Jake murmured, his voice soft but full of sincerity. Lily smiled gently, her fingers tracing soft patterns on his chest. "You finally stopped running." He kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "I'll never run from you again, Lily. Never." They lay there in silence, letting their presence speak more than words could. The tension that had once existed between them was gone, and the weight of uncertainty had been replaced by the lightness of knowing that, finally, they were together without barriers, without excuses. That night, as sleep slowly claimed them, Lily felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. Jake was beside her, and this time, there was no doubt that he would stay. They had both surrendered to the love that had always existed, but now, they were ready to live it fully. And in that moment, nothing else seemed to matter. The next morning, Lily woke to the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains. The warmth of Jake beside her was still present, and for a brief moment, she felt a deep sense of peace, as though everything had finally fallen into place. She turned in bed, finding his face gently illuminated by the first rays of sun. He looked peaceful, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. Seeing Jake there, sleeping next to her, made her believe that everything they had gone through had been worth it. They had finally surrendered to the love they felt for each other. But as the minutes passed and the reality of the new day settled in, a slight unease began to creep in. Lily didn't know what came next. There was a calmness in the air, but beneath it, there was a palpable tension that only grew as Jake began to wake up. When he opened his eyes and they locked gazes, Lily's soft smile was quickly met with a heavier expression on Jake's face. The peace she had felt began to dissolve. At first, Jake didn't say anything, but Lily could see the internal struggle etched on his face. He sat up in bed, rubbing his face with his hands as if trying to clear his thoughts. She watched him, feeling her stomach twist with a growing sense that something was wrong. "Jake," she began, her voice soft but hesitant. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond immediately. It was as if he was carefully choosing his words, trying to say something without delivering a direct blow, but his silence already spoke volumes. When he finally did speak, his tone was heavy with uncertainty. "I don't know, Lily." He looked at her with an expression that made her inwardly recoil. "Last night was amazing, but now everything feels so complicated." Lily's heart tightened, the relief she had felt the night before quickly being replaced by a rising fear. She straightened in bed, trying to keep calm, but she could already feel the emotional distance Jake was putting between them. "Why complicated? We finally gave in to what we feel. I thought you had decided to stop running," she said, her voice filled with hope but tinged with frustration. Jake sighed, getting out of bed and pacing around the room, clearly disturbed. "I thought I was ready. I wanted to believe I was. But now that this has happened, I can't stop thinking about the consequences. Ryan, he's never going to understand. What if this destroys my friendship with him? What if it destroys us?" Ryan's name hung in the air like a shadow over them. Lily knew that, at some point, they would have to face this conversation, but she hadn't expected it to come so quickly or with such intensity. "Jake, I understand that you're afraid of how Ryan will react, but he can't be the only reason for you to pull away again. We both know that what we have is real. We can't just pretend nothing happened because we're scared of what others will think." Jake stopped pacing, looking at her with a pained expression. "I don't want to hurt you, Lily, but at the same time, I don't want what we did to destroy everything I've built with Ryan. He's always been my best friend, and now, I feel like I'm betraying that friendship. Lily got out of bed, walking over to Jake, placing her hands on his shoulders. You're not betraying anyone. What happened between us isn't wrong, Jake. We can't control who we fall in love with. And if you love Ryan, he'll understand that you deserve to be happy too. Jake looked down, lost in her words. He held her hands, but the tension between them was palpable. I want to believe that, but what if he doesn't understand? What if he thinks I was dishonest with him, that I hid something from him? Lily let out a deep breath. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but she also knew they couldn't keep postponing their lives out of fear. Jake, we can't live like this. I'm willing to fight for us, for this love, but you have to want it as much as I do. He pulled her into a tight embrace, almost desperate, as if he wanted to protect her and, at the same time, protect himself from a world full of complications. I love you, Lily, he whispered, his words filled with emotion. But what now? How do we face this? She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, seeing how torn he was. His love for her was real. She could feel it, but so was his fear. Jake, I know you're scared. So am I. But we can't keep living like this, in secret, hiding what we feel. We need to talk to Ryan. We need to tell him the truth. He deserves to know, and we deserve the chance to live this without lies. Jake was silent, pondering her words. The conflict inside him was clear. As much as he loved Lily, the idea of losing Ryan's friendship terrified him. It had been a foundational part of his life for so many years. How could he risk that? But at the same time, looking at Lily and imagining a life without her now seemed just as unbearable. I don't know if I can face that right now, he admitted, his voice trembling. I just need time. Lily's heart clenched. She knew this meant he was still running, that his fear was still holding him back. Jake, how much time do you need? We've already waited so long. I can't keep waiting for you to decide what to do with your feelings. Jake took a deep breath, letting go of her slightly and stepping back. I know I'm asking a lot from you, Lily, but this is huge. I just need to think. We need to think. Lily felt the weight of his words, like an anchor pulling her down. She had waited so long for Jake to admit how he felt, and now that he had finally done so, he was retreating again, bound by his fear of the consequences. She loved him deeply, but she didn't know if she could endure this indecision much longer. I love you, Jake, she said, her voice soft but firm, but I can't keep fighting alone. Jake looked at her, the conflict visible in his eyes, but he didn't respond. The silence between them was deafening, heavy with everything they hadn't resolved yet. That night, after Jake left to take the time he needed, Lily sat alone in her room, feeling the weight of his indecision. She knew that, as much as she wanted to fight for this love, Jake had to be willing to face his fears too. And until that happened, she couldn't keep sacrificing herself for a possibility he wasn't ready to embrace. As the quiet of the night enveloped her, Lily realized that, as much as she loved Jake, she also needed to protect herself. She couldn't wait forever. The days following their night together were tense and heavy for Lily. Each unanswered message, each prolonged silence from Jake, pushed her into an emotional abyss from which she didn't know how to escape. No matter how much she tried to focus on other things, thoughts of him kept consuming her mind, poisoning her moments of peace. She knew he was struggling, caught between what he felt for her and the guilt that seemed to suffocate him. But as time went on, Lily felt that something was about to break. Finally, after days of silence, Jake asked to meet her. His message was short, direct, lacking the tenderness he usually showed, and it sent a cold shiver down Lily's spine the moment she read those few words. She knew the conversation they would have wouldn't be easy. She felt the weight of fear growing inside her, but she agreed to see him anyway. When Lily arrived at the small cafe where Jake had suggested they meet, her heart was racing, and her hands were sweating, betraying the nervousness she was trying to hide. Upon entering, she saw him sitting at a table in the corner, absent-mindedly stirring his cup of coffee. He looked worn out, his gaze lost, worry lines etched deeply into his face. When he saw her, Jake slowly stood up, as if the weight of guilt and fear was crushing him. Lily's heart tightened even more. She approached, trying to mask the uncertainty that dominated each step. They sat down, and for a moment, The silence between them was deafening. The tense atmosphere was almost tangible, and Lily knew that something was coming. Something she didn't want to hear, but could feel was inevitable. "Jake, what's going on?" she finally asked, her voice low but firm. "Why are you avoiding me?" He sighed, not looking directly at her. His fingers tapped nervously on the table, as if he was searching for the courage to say what he had already decided. When he finally raised his eyes, Lily saw the pain and guilt in his gaze, but it didn't prepare her for what he was about to say. "Lily," Jake began, his voice faltering. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happened." She held her breath, waiting for him to continue. Each word felt like a slow, anticipated blow, yet still impossible to avoid. "I think it was a mistake," he finally said, his words slicing through the silence like a sharp blade. Lily felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. What had he just said? A mistake? She blinked, confused, trying to process the words. What? A mistake? Jake looked at her, and for a moment, the pain on his face mirrored the one she felt. "We never should have gotten involved like that. I can't keep doing this, knowing the consequences. I can't destroy my friendship with Ryan. I can't do this to him. I can't." "You're saying that our night together was a mistake?" Lily asked, her voice trembling, her body beginning to feel the impact of his words. "That what we feel is a mistake?" Jake shook his head, clearly conflicted but still firm in his response. "It's not what I feel for you that's wrong, but the situation, all of this. I can't keep going, Lily. We can't keep going." She stared at him, feeling the tears welling up. Each word from him was like a stab to her heart, and no matter how much she wanted to believe he was just scared, the resolve in his voice made it clear he had made up his mind. "So you're just going to end everything?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "After everything we've been through, you're going to leave me because you're afraid of the consequences? Because you're scared of how Ryan will react?" Jake lowered his head, guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I really am. But I can't keep doing this. I can't live with this guilt, this weight. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to anyone." She shook her head in disbelief, the tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "You said you loved me, Jake. You said you wouldn't run away anymore." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words were hurting him as much as they were hurting her. "I love you, Lily. But sometimes, loving someone isn't enough. And I can't keep running from reality." Those words shattered something inside her. Lily felt as if she were crumbling from the inside, as if everything she had built with him, all the hope she had nurtured, was falling apart before her eyes. She had fought so hard for this love, believed in it so deeply, and now he was throwing it all away, unable to face the consequences. "You're giving up on us," she said, the pain in her voice raw and clear. "You're giving up on me." Jake didn't respond immediately. He knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. "I just want to do what's right. And I don't know if what we're doing is right anymore." Lily stood up, her heart racing, her body trembling. "So that's it? You're just going to leave me here? You're going back to New York and pretending like nothing happened?" "It's not like that," Jake began, but the words died in his throat. "It's exactly like that," she retorted, her pain turning into anger. "You don't have the courage to fight for what you want, for what you feel. And now, you're leaving me to deal with the consequences alone." She grabbed her bag, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall even harder. Jake's gaze followed her, laden with guilt, but he didn't try to stop her. There were no more words, just the sound of Lily's heart breaking as she left the cafe. His last words still echoed in her mind, piercing her soul like thorns. "I love you, but that's not enough." When Lily left the cafe, the cold New York air hit her like a slap, but nothing could be more painful than what she had just heard. She wandered the streets aimlessly, the tears now flowing freely. The sound of cars, of people, everything around her felt distant, as if the world had become a shadow of reality. Jake had ended things. He had thrown away everything they had built, everything they felt, out of fear and guilt. And now, she was alone, not knowing how to move forward. When she finally arrived at the hotel, Lily collapsed onto the bed, her sobs taking over completely. The memories of their time together, the promises he had made, the words of love they had exchanged, it all felt empty now. The pain was unbearable, and she felt as if her world had been ripped away from her. The breakup wasn't just an end. It was the collapse of everything she believed in. She loved Jake, and she believed he loved her too. But in the end, fear had spoken louder. And now, all that remained was the crushing pain of loss. The flight back to Seattle was the longest one Lily had ever experienced. Not because of its actual duration, but because of the overwhelming pain she felt every second. As the clouds passed by the airplane window, she tried to find some peace, some comfort, but nothing seemed to help. The conversation with Jake echoed in her mind, over and over. Every word, every look, every moment when he reaffirmed that it was a mistake, that they couldn't continue together. The weight of those words crushed her, making the thought of returning home unbearable. When the plane landed, Seattle seemed different, as if the city had lost its shine. The gray sky mirrored Lily's mood perfectly, and the damp air seemed to seep into her skin, freezing her from the inside. Mia, who knew how much Lily was suffering, waited for her at the airport, eager to comfort her friend. As soon as Lily saw Mia, her eyes filled with tears, and she ran into her friend's arms, feeling the wall of strength she had built during the flight crumble at last. He ended everything, Lily said between sobs as Mia held her tightly. "I'm so sorry, Lil," Mia whispered. "You don't deserve this." But no matter how much Mia said the right things, no matter how hard she tried to ease Lily's pain, nothing seemed capable of filling the void Jake had left behind. When they arrived at the apartment, Mia made her lie down and brought her a cup of tea, hoping that some physical comfort might ease the emotional pain. But the vacant look in Lily's eyes made it clear that her heart was shattered, and it would take a long time for her to put herself back together. In the days that followed, the pain didn't subside. On the contrary, it seemed to intensify with each passing morning, as Lily realized that Jake wasn't there, that everything they had built together had been destroyed by a fear he couldn't overcome. His absence was a massive hole in her life, and she felt like a shadow of who she once was. Every place she visited, every song she heard, brought back memories of Jake. The laughter they shared, the deep conversations, the moments of intimacy, everything was ingrained in her mind and heart. Lily tried to keep herself busy with work and studies, but nothing seemed to distract her from the pain. Her classes became monotonous, and the days passed in a haze of sadness. She found herself constantly looking at her phone, hoping for a message, a sign from Jake, something to indicate that he missed her too. But the silence was deafening. He didn't call, he didn't send any messages. And as the days went by, the hope that he might regret his decision and come back to her began to fade. Jake, on the other hand, was trying to move on in New York. Regret and guilt consumed him in ways he couldn't control. After breaking things off with Lily, he had returned to his routine, trying to convince himself that he had made the right decision. But no matter how much he told himself he had done what was best for everyone, the truth was that nothing felt right. Each morning was a reminder of what he had lost, and Lily's absence haunted him. New York, once a place of escape for him, now felt suffocating. The crowded streets, the frantic pace, everything that once distracted him now echoed the emptiness he felt inside. Jake spent long hours at work, burying himself in projects, but deep down, he knew he was just running away again. He had managed to keep his physical distance from Lily, but the memory of her lingered. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, the weight of loneliness would wash over him like an uncontrollable tide. He found himself thinking about the night they spent together, the way she looked at him, how everything had seemed so right in that moment. But now, everything felt confusing, and regret took over. The days dragged on, and the distance between Jake and Lily grew with each passing second. Neither of them reached out. Lily forced herself to believe that moving on was the only option, but every time she thought about it, a part of her heart seemed to shatter even more. The effort to keep going, to get up and face each day, was monumental. There were times when she isolated herself in her room, trying not to think about Jake, but the pain of his absence was constant. Jake, on the other hand, was sinking deeper into his own anguish. No matter how much he tried to distract himself, he knew that guilt was eating away at his soul. He had lost Lily because of his fears, and now, all that remained was uncertainty. He thought about sending a message, about calling her, but every time he picked up his phone, the image of Ryan would come to mind. The guilt of believing he had betrayed his best friend paralyzed him, and with each moment of hesitation, the distance between him and Lily seemed to grow even more. The distance between them was palpable, and both were lost in their own torment. Lily, despite being surrounded by the support of Mia and others who tried to cheer her up, felt as if she were alone. No one truly understood what she was going through. She had given herself completely to Jake, believing that their love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. But now, all she had were painful memories and a void that seemed impossible to fill. Jake, on the other hand, was caught in an internal battle that left him exhausted. He knew he loved Lily. He knew that what he felt for her was real, but the fear of facing the consequences still held him captive. He couldn't shake the thought that, by trying to be with her, he would destroy what he had with Ryan. The friendship they had built over the years seemed like a burden on his decisions, and the guilt of not being honest about his feelings from the beginning consumed him. As Lily sank deeper into her sadness, Jake was lost in his own pain. Neither of them could find a way to move forward. The absence of the other was unbearable, but the fear and guilt that separated them were stronger than any step they could take to reconnect. Both were trapped in a cycle of pain, and the emotional distance, much crueler than the physical one, kept them prisoners of their own fears and regrets. The audience could feel the growing despair between the two. There was a silent outcry for something to change, for one of them to have the courage to break the silence. But fear, guilt, and regret seemed to be an impenetrable barrier. And as the story reached its peak of sorrow, the sense that both were on the verge of losing something irreplaceable became unbearable. The days passed, but the pain didn't lessen. Not for Lily, nor for Jake. Both knew that the love was still there, pulsing beneath the surface. But what to do with that love? How to move forward when all they felt was loss and regret? Time continued to pass, but the weight of the pain didn't lessen for Lily. Each day felt like a reflection of the one before, empty and without purpose. She forced herself to stick to a routine, as if each small action helped maintain the illusion that she was okay. But inside, she knew she wasn't. Her heart, broken by Jake, still ached like an open wound, and no matter how hard she tried to move on, the love she felt for him continued to grow, though now accompanied by deep sadness. Ryan, unaware of what had happened between his sister and his best friend, began to notice that Lily was different. He saw her withdraw from the light she used to have. The energy that always defined her had vanished. When she was home, she spent much of her time in her room, isolating herself, and Ryan began to worry. One rainy afternoon, he found her sitting on the living room couch, lost in thought, staring out the window. "Are you okay, Lil?" Ryan asked, sitting down beside her. "You seem so distant lately." Lily tried to smile, but it came out forced. She shook her head, not wanting to burden her brother. "I'm just a bit tired, Ryan. Nothing major." He watched her for a moment, clearly unconvinced. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here, okay?" She nodded, silently grateful that he didn't push further. But Ryan's words stirred something inside her. She was living a lie, hiding the pain, hiding what had happened with Jake, and it was destroying her. Ryan had no idea about the emotional battle Lily faced every day, and each time he mentioned Jake casually, as if everything was fine, her guilt and sorrow intensified. Lily knew she couldn't continue like this forever. Deep down, she understood that she needed to confront this reality somehow, but she didn't know where to start. She still loved Jake, but she felt that he had decided that his fear was greater than anything he felt for her. It was devastating to admit that. Perhaps it was time to truly accept that he wasn't coming back, that the decision to move on was now in her hands. In New York, Jake was also sinking further into his own loneliness. He tried to ignore the pain, to carry on with his life as if nothing had changed. Work consumed him, but in every moment of silence, Lily's absence was unbearable. He saw her in every corner, in every song he heard, in every anonymous face passing him on the street. The longing was eating him alive from the inside out, and no matter how hard he tried to convince himself that he had made the right decision, doubt grew stronger with each day. The guilt of having ended things with Lily because of Ryan still haunted him. He felt trapped between his love for Lily and his fear of losing his best friend, and this internal conflict was tearing him apart. He wondered if Ryan would understand, if their friendship would be strong enough to withstand the truth, but he never had the courage to find out. The fear was greater than the hope, and that kept him frozen, unable to act. One night, after another lifeless day at work, Jake found himself alone in his apartment, staring at his phone. There was a message he had never sent, a message saved in his drafts, written right after the breakup, but one he never had the courage to send. He read it over and over, trying to understand why it was so hard to communicate with Lily. He knew he needed to talk to her, but the weight of what he had done paralyzed him. The message said, "Lily, I'm sorry. I know I was a coward. I know I hurt you more than anyone should, and I don't know how to fix that. What I feel for you hasn't changed and never will. But the fear of losing Ryan, of hurting everyone, was stronger than the courage to fight for us. And now I'm trapped in this guilt, not knowing how to move forward. I just wish things were different. I wish I were different." He read the words over and over, but every time he thought about sending it, his hands shook, and he gave up. How could that message fix everything? It felt more like an empty apology than a real attempt at reconciliation. Jake knew it wasn't enough to just tell Lily he loved her, not after everything he had done. But at the same time, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Lily's image haunted him, and each night he asked himself, what if I had fought for her? Jake found himself at a breaking point. He needed to make a decision. Either he would truly try to move on without Lily, or he would face his fears and the truth with Ryan. But the silence between him and Lily was unbearable. The emotional distance between them consumed him, and he knew he was losing himself more and more in that void. While Jake battled his own demons, Lily was trying to find some comfort in the life that remained. Mia continued to be a constant support, and Lily knew she wouldn't have made it through those first few days without her friend by her side. Even so, the sadness remained a constant burden. Mia, although unaware of all the details, sensed that there was something much deeper in Lily's pain. One particularly quiet night, after a long, casual conversation with Mia, Lily decided to do something she had been putting off since she returned from New York: write a letter to Jake. She needed to say everything she hadn't been able to, needed to release what was still holding her back. She wasn't sure if she would ever send the letter, but writing it felt like the first step toward letting go. Jake, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe I'll never send it, but I need to put into words everything I'm feeling because keeping it inside is destroying me. I loved you, Jake. I still love you, even now, after everything. I can't just turn off what I feel. No matter how hard I try, no matter how much I want to move on, you're still in every corner of my mind. I understand that you're afraid. I understand that Ryan is important to you, but by choosing not to fight for us, you left me completely alone. You made me believe that our love wasn't enough to overcome the obstacles, and that destroyed me. I feel like I was never a priority for you, that you were always torn between fear and desire, and now I'm trapped in this indecision, not knowing how to move forward. I don't expect you to come back. I don't expect this to be fixed with a single message, but I need you to know how much I loved you, how much I still love you, and how, despite everything, I wish you had fought for us. When she finished writing, silent tears streamed down Lily's face. The words had flowed so easily that she realized just how much she had been holding inside. She folded the letter carefully, but instead of putting it away, she left it on the table, deciding that sending it wasn't her priority now. Maybe this was closure for herself, not for Jake. The days continued to drag on, and both Lily and Jake remained trapped in their own anguish. Both knew that the love between them still existed, but the barriers they had created seemed insurmountable. The distance was unbearable, and the silence between them cried out for something: a sign, a gesture, something to break the cycle of pain that surrounded them. The plane that brought Jake back to Seattle landed under a cloudy sky, with cold wind hitting the windows, perfectly reflecting Jake's emotional state. As he stepped onto the ground, he felt a knot in his stomach, a mixture of fear and hope. He was back because he could no longer ignore what he felt for Lily. The distance, the silence, the emptiness that settled in since he left, it was consuming him. He knew, more than ever, that he had to fix what he had broken. And the only way to do that was to face the truth, to face Lily. Every step he took toward the Thompson house felt heavy, as if the air around him was thicker, making it hard to breathe. He didn't know how he would be received, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't leave without asking for forgiveness, without opening his heart. The fear of losing Lily for good was far greater than any other fear he carried. He loved her deeply, and for far too long, he had allowed that love to be suffocated by guilt and fear of hurting Ryan. But now, he realized he had already hurt the people he loved most with his silence, his hesitation. When he arrived at the front of the house, Jake paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The gate, the familiar entrance, the garden, everything looked the same, but he knew something fundamental had changed. He had changed, and maybe Lily had too. That terrified him. What if it was too late? With his heart pounding, he rang the doorbell. Every second of waiting felt like an eternity. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Lily who appeared but Ryan. The shock of seeing him, unprepared for what was coming, made Jake freeze for a moment. Ryan looked at him with a surprised expression, but soon smiled, as he always did. "Jake, I didn't know you were back," Ryan said, clearly unaware of what was happening between him and Lily. Jake felt a pang of guilt, but he was there for a bigger reason. He needed to find Lily, to talk to her before anything else. "Yeah, I just got back today," Jake replied, trying to stay calm. "Is Lily home?" Ryan's smile faded a bit, and he studied Jake more closely. "She is, but..." He hesitated for a second, seeming uncertain. "Jake, she hasn't been herself lately. She's going through something, but she won't talk much about it. Maybe now's a good time to talk to her. She's in her room, if you want to go up." Jake nodded gratefully and headed to Lily's room, feeling the weight of each step. The walk to her door seemed longer than he remembered, and when he finally reached it, he paused for a second, taking in a deep breath. He knew this moment would be crucial. He knocked gently on the door, anxiously waiting for a response. Lily's soft voice came from the other side, muffled but recognizable. "Come in." As he opened the door, Jake found Lily sitting on the bed, her eyes gazing out the window. Her face, illuminated by the dim light coming through, was marked by exhaustion and pain, but also by a quiet strength. She turned slowly to look at him, and the surprise in her eyes was evident. Jake felt his heart clench, seeing her like that, so beautiful, yet clearly hurt. "Lily," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm back." She was silent for a moment, trying to process what was happening. "What are you doing here, Jake?" Her voice was firm, but there was a vulnerability beneath it that he recognized. Jake stepped forward but kept a respectful distance, his eyes fixed on hers. "I came because I can't keep living like this. I can't stay away from you, knowing how much I hurt you, how much of a coward I was. I left because I was scared, because I thought protecting Ryan and our friendship was the right thing to do. But, Lily, all I did was push away the people who matter most to me." She looked away, struggling to keep her composure. "You left me, Jake. You said what we had was a mistake. How can you just come back now and expect me to simply accept that?" He felt the weight of those words, knowing they were a deserved punishment for his choices. But he knew he couldn't give up now. I know I messed up. I know I was weak. But Lily, what I feel for you is never a mistake. The mistake was running from it. Running from you, from us." Jake took another step forward, his voice softer now. "I love you. I've always loved you. And I know it's late, maybe too late, but I'm here now. And I'm willing to fight for you. For us." His words hung in the air, and Lily remained silent, absorbing each one. She stood up from the bed, crossing her arms as if trying to protect herself from the vulnerability he was bringing back to the surface. "Jake, I loved you so much. I fought for you. I waited for you. And you left. You left me to deal with everything on my own. How can I believe you won't do that again?" Tears began to well up in Jake's eyes, the pain on his face clear. "I won't. I can't. Lily, I lost you once, and it destroyed me. I can't live like this without you. I made so many mistakes, and I know I hurt you. But I'm here now, with my heart open. If you give me a chance, I'll prove to you that I'm here to stay." Lily looked at him, and Jake saw the conflict in her eyes. She still loved him, he knew that. But the pain he caused made her hesitate, and she had every right to protect herself. Jake waited, his heart racing, while she processed everything. "I love you too, Jake," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "But what you did, it broke me. I spent so much time trying to understand why you didn't fight for us, trying to accept that your fear was greater than your love. And it hurt me in ways you can't imagine." Jake stepped closer, reaching out his hand to her. "Let me fix this, Lily. Let me show you that I've changed, that I'm willing to face anything for us. I'll tell Ryan the truth. I can't live with this guilt, with this fear anymore. I just want you to know that I choose you, now and always." Lily looked at him for a long moment, her mind and heart at war. The love she felt for him was still strong, but the wound he left behind was deep. But in that moment, something inside her broke, not a weakness, but a barrier she had built to protect herself. She realized that she still wanted to fight for them, and despite the pain, the love she felt for Jake was greater. She stepped forward and, with a deep breath, took Jake's hand. His touch was warm, comforting. "If you're willing to fight, then so am I," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But you need to prove to me that you won't leave again, Jake. I can't go through that again." Jake nodded, the tears he had been holding back finally streaming down his face. "I will, Lily. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm here to stay." They embraced, and in the warmth of that hug, they both felt that something had finally shifted. The pain, the distance, the guilt, it all began to fade. They were together again, ready to face the challenges, ready to fight for the love that had never truly died. The reconciliation between Jake and Lily brought with it a sense of relief and hope that neither of them had experienced in months. From that moment in Lily's room, when she embraced him and accepted his extended hand, they both knew they were ready to face the future together. The days that followed were filled with adjustments and honest conversations, as if they needed to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't easy, but both were determined to make it work. Jake didn't waste any time. He fulfilled the promise he had made to Lily that afternoon, the one to face the consequences and be honest with Ryan. This would be their first major challenge as a couple, and as much as fear still consumed him, he knew he couldn't run anymore. On the morning he decided to talk to Ryan, Jake arrived at the Thompson house with his heart racing but determined. Ryan, unaware of what was coming, greeted him with his usual hospitality. However, the tension in the air quickly became apparent. Jake asked them to sit down, and even before he started talking, Ryan sensed that something serious was about to happen. "Ryan, I need to tell you something," Jake began, his voice serious but firm. "And I know this might be hard to hear, but you need to know the truth." Ryan frowned, visibly confused. "Okay, Jake, what's going on?" Jake took a deep breath, knowing there was no easy way to say what he was about to say. "Lily and we got involved. I fell in love with her, and things between us got complicated." Ryan blinked, surprised. He remained silent for a few seconds, processing the revelation. "You and Lily?" he repeated, his voice full of disbelief. Jake nodded. "I should have told you earlier, but I was so scared of losing our friendship, of hurting both of you, that I ended up hurting myself, and worse, hurting Lily. But I can't live with this guilt anymore. I love your sister, and I'm willing to face whatever comes, even if it means losing our friendship." The silence that followed was heavy. Ryan stared at him with a mix of surprise and confusion. Jake could see the whirlwind of emotions in his friend's eyes. Ryan stood up, walking over to the window, where he stayed for several minutes, completely silent. Jake didn't know what to expect, but the weight of the situation felt unbearable. Finally, Ryan turned around, crossing his arms. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why hide this from me?" "I was scared, Ryan," Jake admitted. "Scared of how you'd react, scared of losing everything. But hiding the truth only made things worse. I'm not asking for your permission, but I need you to know that what I feel for Lily is real. And if that means I lose your friendship, I'll accept that, but I can't keep lying." Ryan shook his head, still visibly shaken. I don't know what to say. This really caught me off guard, man. But at the same time, I trust you. And more importantly, I trust my sister. If she loves you, and you truly love her, then who am I to get in the way?" The relief was immediate. Jake felt the weight on his shoulders lighten, but he knew things weren't entirely resolved. Ryan wasn't angry, but he was clearly still processing everything he had just heard. But Ryan continued, his tone more serious. You better never hurt Lily again. Understood? Because if you do, you and I, well, it won't end well. Jake nodded, understanding the seriousness of Ryan's words. I'll never hurt Lily again. I promise. With that, the tension between them eased. Ryan still seemed to be digesting the situation, but Jake's relief was palpable. He had finally faced his greatest fear, and Ryan's reaction, although unpredictable, wasn't the worst. In fact, his friend's reluctant support gave him the strength he needed to move forward. Back at Lily's house, Jake told her about the conversation with Ryan. The relief on her face was evident, and together, they felt like they could finally begin living their love openly, without hiding. The weeks that followed were filled with rebuilding. Jake and Lily began to explore a new side of their relationship, now open, without the weight of the secret that had once consumed them. For the first time in a long time, Lily allowed herself to dream of a future with Jake. They started planning small trips together, talked about how they wanted to balance their careers, and even discussed where they'd like to live in the future. These conversations were filled with a mix of laughter and promises, and each day, their relationship grew stronger. One afternoon, while walking in the park where they used to stroll on sunny days, Jake held Lily's hand, their fingers intertwined in a way that conveyed security and love. They stopped in front of a tranquil lake, where the sun's rays danced on the water's surface. I want us to keep doing this, Jake said, his voice soft but filled with intention. I want us to keep planning the future, living together, facing whatever comes. I don't want to live in fear anymore, Lily. I don't want to run from what I feel for you. Lily smiled, looking at him with a sparkle in her eyes that Jake knew well. It was a smile full of hope, love, and trust. I want that too, Jake. I've always wanted that. They stood there for a few minutes, just enjoying the peace of the moment, aware that the path to that point hadn't been easy, but certain that everything had been worth it. The love they felt for each other was stronger than any obstacle they had faced. And now, together, they knew they were ready for anything. There's something I want to ask you, Jake said suddenly, turning to her with a mischievous smile. Lily raised an eyebrow, curious. What? Jake looked around as if checking to make sure they were alone, and then, in one swift motion, he knelt before her, holding Lily's hand with both tenderness and determination. Will you build this future with me? He smiled, pulling a ring from his pocket. Will you be with me, Lily? Today, tomorrow, and forever? Lily felt her heart race. She hadn't been expecting that, at least not so soon, but seeing Jake kneeling before her, his eyes filled with love and sincerity, she knew this was the answer her heart had been waiting to give since the moment she fell in love with him. Yes, Jake. Yes, I will. Jake stood up quickly, pulling Lily into a tight embrace. They laughed together, and when he slipped the ring onto her finger, everything seemed to fall perfectly into place. The future they had begun to imagine was finally within reach. As they walked back home hand in hand, both knew the journey to that point hadn't been easy, but the love they had built was unbreakable. They had faced fears, uncertainties, and challenges, but now they were stronger than ever. Their love, though tested by difficult trials, was meant to last forever.